The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com weekly sale. Go to StarCityGames.com right now because you can save 15% off all played and heavily played foils. And if you're a regular Star City Games shopper, you know that we already price our played and heavily played foils significantly less than those of the same and near mint condition. So 15% off is a huge discount, especially if you are looking to bling out your cube or your commander deck and you don't care as much about cards that have maybe seen some love because you know that you're going to give your cards some extra love when you get them, especially when you put them in your cube, hand them out to your friends, and they don't have to worry about messing up your brand new cards. 15% off all played and heavily played foils. Right now, until July 12th at 10:59 a.m., head over to StarCityGames.com/sale. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 540. And we know here at the 540 that you have been waiting very impatiently for a new Magic set to come out. It's been almost 2 years since the last one. So I am here, Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1, and the most patient man in all of cube drafting.
I am Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. And yeah, it's been 2 weeks since we have done a set review episode. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 2 weeks, not 2 years.
Very close.
Yeah. You know, I got the number right. I feel like that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So today, hopefully, well, I think it's fair to say we're going to be talking about Adventures into the Forgotten Realms, which is the newest standard legal set that's going to be coming to Magic. And I think it is safe to say, because this is going to be safe to say in general, that there's not as many cards for us to talk about in this set as there were in Modern Horizons 2.
Yeah, we'll be doing less than 10 hours on this one, it looks like.
Yes, hope to clock this in between 5 and 6, ultimately. That is a far cry from what we did last time. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of great cube cards in the set, because there are. But I guess before we get into what those are, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I was going to say if you're not a frequent listener, but even if you literally listened 2 weeks ago, you heard us say this. But Ryan, do you want to give the elevator pitch on how we do the breakdowns for the 540?
Yeah, so we're reviewing the set broadly for Cube. Doesn't mean we're talking about every card. In fact, we've kind of broke it down into 2 categories of cards, and we talk about the cards that we feel fit these categories. There are classic Cube cards that you see in a Cube booster pack, and you think, well, that makes sense. That card's just good. And then cards that are custom Cube cards. Those are going to show up. You're kind of expecting things to work with them, to synergize with them. Maybe they don't quite stand on their own merits, but they're still cool cards. There's things you can do with them. And there's going to be some cards we don't talk about. That does not mean that they're not right for you. It's just that they fall a little bit off of what we think is easier to work with or that we are personally more excited about.
Definitely. A lot of cards that we give the custom designation to end up in a ton of cubes. I've actually started to update my personal cube after almost 2 years. I haven't updated it since prior to Throne of Eldraine coming out. But as I've gone through, I realize a lot of the cards that I'm putting in are ones that we would have ranked or as identified as custom. But obviously, there's going to be a ton of cubes that all of these cards are going to go into. The classic designation is just the ones that we feel pretty much hit the mark across the board.
And as a matter of fact, I generally find the custom cards more exciting than the classic cards, with a few exceptions. But
of course,
yeah, cube is largely a matter of self-expression. It's really fun to work with the stuff nobody else is up to, or maybe fewer people are champing at the bit to play with. But if they particularly speak to you, that's the reason to put them in your cube.
Yeah, and as we have said and we talk about frequently, this is a great time to be a cube owner or cube designer, because modern Magic design indicates that all of the cards that we're talking about are going to be good in some sort of cube. 10 years ago, if we were to be doing custom and classic, the custom cards would just be, could never make it in a 540 card cube, but if it's a 720 card cube, you can probably fit it in. Not the case now. It's just you have a really great designation of different archetypes and themes and strategies you want to try to push. And that's going to be quite relevant, I think, for today's discussion.
Yeah, and this set is just dripping with flavor, too. We're looking at cards that are specifically designed to be evocative of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's a lot of stuff that's really heavy-handed in conveying that, and a lot of stuff that would make sense to put aesthetically in the same cube if you wanted to be motivated by aesthetics as opposed to mechanics. Well, actually, they're pretty mechanically coherent, too. There's a lot of stuff that revolves around rolling a D20, and it kind of makes a lot of sense to jam that all together. And I don't think we're going to be talking about every card that says roll a D20, but if you're really into that, you might put every card that says roll a D20 into a cube.
You could. And I'm sure that, that's probably going to be one of those where if you're going for a certain type of theme, if you're really trying to create moments that people remember rather than like the most cohesive gameplay possible, not to say that you're not having cohesive gameplay, but when you introduce randomness in that venture, well, I shouldn't use the word venture. In that way, you're going to be moving towards a cube that's like, oh, let's have a bunch of these moments when you roll the die or flip the coin and see what happens. And I think that is definitely can be a lot of fun, especially if you form the cube around those type of things together.
Yeah, and those are just really easy moments to plant in your cube when you have a few other people watching the game, that the game has to stop and you wait for this tense thing to resolve itself. It's very cool. Very
much so. Now, before we get into this, and even before we get into the review, I want to say, because this is going to come up, I have never one time in my life played Dungeons and Dragons.
Ooh, okay. So I'm a little bit closer to it than you are. I started playing a few years back. Over the pandemic, some friends and we played from start to finish. One of the pre-made campaigns was called Descent into Avernus. It took us about a year and 2 months. We finished the campaign playing on a website called Roll20, where you can play online. That was actually like a really big thing into maintaining some normalcy for us. And then I actually just finished the third session DMing my own campaign. I'm pretty well hooked at this point.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to. I've never had an opportunity to do it. It's just not come up for whatever reason.
So some people that have played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I do mean people that have played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, are probably a little bit taken by the fact that I said we completed a campaign. Like, there's a lot of difficulty getting people organized, especially to play regularly. So even if you have interest, it's not always the easiest to get out and play. But stuff like Adventure League, maybe you have some local spot that hosts that. You can just jump in on a game weekly, but it is a big commitment. It's a lot of rules to it.
Yeah. So as we go through these, I can safely say that almost none of the flavor I get.
Okay.
Now, I understand some of the really surface level stuff. For example, we're going to be talking about inevitably the class enchantments. I understand that, but I don't get most of it. But that doesn't mean that I don't dislike it. I just am kind of shrugging my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening and you're a fan of D&D, and this might go for Ryan too, I want people to go gentle on me, just because there's going to be times when I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And obviously it is very general flavor, fantasy. So I will get some of it, but I'm not going to get anything that's even a mild cut, not even deep cut. I'm far away from that.
Yeah, I think that the set does a good job of some stuff that's really in your face, and I actually eat that up a little bit more than some of the heavier references, and some of that is that I am just relatively new to the game. But I like the flavor of cards like You're Ambushed on the Road. Well, we'll get to that card later, but it's just, here's 2 things you can do, and that's like, those are really good moments for D&D, and that's a really good skin for a Magic modal card. I like those ones quite a lot.
Yeah, very cool. So, but before we get to the actual cards, let's talk about the set mechanics, because there are, in my mind, there are 3 that are notable for our discussion, and 2 that are like kind of outside of the norm. The first one, which is the easy one, I just kind of want to address as blanketly, which is there's a lot of cards that say the words "activate this ability once a turn."
Mm-hmm.
I don't like pretty much any of those cards for Cube.
I like I'm a just gonna small number of them. And this one is kind of a D&D flavor thing in a way that maybe isn't very resonant or very cool. There's a lot of abilities in D&D where you can use them once until you have a short or a long rest. So you're kind of tying in there, but it's a little bit of a stretch, and it's not very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a Magic player, I like to activate abilities a lot of times a turn. So I don't like when I'm told I can only activate it once a turn. Now that doesn't mean that there's going to be 0 cards that I like, but starting off, I'm very cold on all of those.
Yeah.
Just as we go along, just to get that out there.
Yeah, I'm generally with you. I think there's a card that you were going to say that you don't like, and I kind of have self-identified to this point as the only person on Earth who really likes this card. We'll get to that later.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, so there's 2 big mechanics that are different than pretty much any other Magic set. We've mentioned one of them, and that is the mechanic that when something triggers, you roll a d20, and then based on the result, you do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about those kind of as a group?
I think that it's a mechanic that you could do well or poorly on a card-by-card basis. I think that I'm excited for some of the cards. Some of the cards are kind of misses, but they're also safe in terms of making this a mechanic in Magic the Gathering. So I do have a lot of respect for how difficult that is to balance.
Big time.
There is something that I think reads a little bit weird, and you might not pick up initially looking at the card, but they did deliberately do some of them where there's 2 outcomes, but they're set up so it's like a weighted coin. It's 55%, 45%, where 1 to 9 has a less good effect, 10 to 20 has a better effect. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that is flavorfully rooted in D&D, where a difficulty of 10 is a common outcome, where you have to get at least 10 to do a lot of at least mundane things in Dungeons and Dragons. And then it also makes it so that D20 is different from a coin for Magic purposes.
Yeah, which I totally get. And also, like, as someone again that's outside of that world, when I roll a D20, if I get a double-digit number, I should be excited, not disappointed that I didn't get one higher double-digit number.
Yep. Actually, so I'm working on running a another pre-made campaign. It's called Curse of Strahd, which is one of the more popular pre-made campaigns in all of D&D. And a lot of stuff is set up to be it's called a DC 15. So you got to get at least 15 with your modifications to break it. And I think that making it so you have to roll a die and you have to be at least 15, at least on the early levels, is not very fun. But when it's actually closer to a coin flip, I think that can be pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and you started playing D&D more virtually than in person.
Yes.
So maybe this isn't a big thing, but to me, I'm at a crossroads because I don't dislike the cards. To be clear, I think all of the cards are fun. I'm very much looking forward to playing them in regularly. I think that's going to be a blast because there's generally no bad effects. There's a couple if you get like a 1, it's a bad effect, but for the most part, they're all good and better. But I would imagine that you would want to roll a physical die.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so you're with me on that.
There's actually a feature to turn on. It's called 3D dice, where you get to watch the dice roll online.
Yeah, that's a must, right? Like you're not just hitting a random number generator and it shows up. That's so unsatisfying.
The website slows down when there's a lot of traffic, and it slows down more if you use the 3D dice, but I just never turned it off. I couldn't imagine turning it off.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing that either. Okay, so that brings me to the next point. It is very inconvenient to have a D20 packaged with your cube.
It's not a given.
In most cases. Yeah. I think, D6 dice always slot in cleanly in whatever carrying device, and D20s rarely do. Which is that is a slight annoyance to me.
They do have phone apps where you can shake your phone to roll the die.
Yeah, but that's not the same.
With the haptics, though, it's as close as you can get if you do forget your D20.
Yeah. I mean, that would be break glass in case of emergency, not like this is my plan.
Sure. Yep.
If I'm playing in person with another human being, like it needs to be a fully physical experience, especially post COVID. Like I don't want to do anything digital if I can help it.
I mean, I have kind of just extra versions of certain things just in my backpack, and a lot of it's just because I used to travel a lot. So extra toothbrush, extra toothpaste, the phone charger. And just like having some emergency D20s is probably going to be on my list now.
This is a serious statement, non-ironically. In my little like toiletry bag that has like my my deodorant, toothbrush, etc. I have in a little pouch a D6.
Nice,
just in case.
Yeah,
you never know when you got to resolve something.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've only used it once, but that was enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only serious miss, and we're not talking about the cards, I'll bring it up now. The fact that it would be really tedious to make it work in Magic, but the fact that there's no modified rolls. Ideally there would be like a 20 and a 1 for a critical success or failure for every card, but then there's like the +2, is it a mace, whatever it is, equipment, where that mechanic in D&D is supposed to modify your ability to roll a die, and there's none of that going on here, where again, it would be kind of nonsense to put it into Magic. And there's some stuff that lets you re-roll, which is something that there are mechanics like that in D&D. I like that. The no modified dice, but then also having the +2 mace has a little bit of a slap in the face.
Okay. All right. So another thing that I legitimately don't know how to, as again, a non-D&D person, how to feel about this. How do you feel about the venturing into the dungeon mechanic?
I don't think that my appreciation for these cards is actually motivated by my engagement with Dungeons and Dragons. I actually really like these cards from somebody who has taken what is largely a casual interest in game design, but game design principles certainly come up when you're trying to curate a cube with a balanced play experience. So I assume that a lot of listeners take at least that casual interest in game design. And I see this card, and the fact that they made this work with the Magic rules engine and look so clean on a card, it was a really big wow moment for me.
Yeah. I largely agree. I'm Like, I just looked at it and I was like, what am I even looking at? But it's wildly simple.
Mm-hmm.
For as much as you have going on and the feel of like what it's supposed to be doing, I have to imagine that it's like when they got this, I feel like when Wizards got this right, they just knew. They're like, this is it. Yeah. This is the thing.
So I saw these. I think these were the first things we really saw. We saw like a couple of cards previewed, but we didn't really know what venturing into the dungeon was. And then I see these dungeons on my timeline, and I think a couple things. First, I don't really know what this is or how it works. But then after that, it's obvious what it's evocative of. I can tell that this is supposed to be a dungeon, and it just looks so clean. It looks clean in a way where I know once it's explained to me, I will easily understand how it works.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So my only small gripe, and this is not a current gripe, but right now we have 3 of these.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be a time in the future, I do not know when, but there will be more than 3 of these. It is inevitable. This set looks like it's going to be very popular. This mechanic looks like it's going to be extremely popular. Wizards like to make money. It's very easy to make more things that are popular to make money. Ergo, there will be more dungeons. The current mechanic for the dungeon or venturing in a dungeon says if you don't have one, you just pick one. These are not format specific. You simply just pick a dungeon, regardless of the format that you're in. So I guess my concern is I'm torn between wanting it to be like, I wish they had ventured into like a specific dungeon, but that's against like the heart of what you're doing because you go through multiple dungeons. It's not called Dungeon and Dragon. It's Dungeons and Dragons. So,
right.
But eventually I feel like that will be, I don't know if it's a problem, but what I'm envisioning is a future where you venture into the dungeon and then instead of your commander menu, you have your dungeon menu.
Yeah.
And you just open like a double-sided and you're like, all right, 1 of 24. And then the game stops while the person is figuring out, well, which dungeon do I want to venture into?
Yeah, I already know I'm going to need a lot of these cards because I'm putting these in more than one cube just from the jump. I'm pretty excited to mess around with these. And they definitely planted, like you said, they can do this mechanic again. They can make more dungeons. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if a couple years down the road we return to Forgotten Realms or something like that, or even just explored the myriad of different settings for Dungeons and Dragons and get some more skinned dungeons for that purpose. So it's interesting. I kind of expect them to play it safe with that, considering that these just you have access to from the start of the game. Like if you venture into a dungeon, you just take one of these cards and now you're in a dungeon. So it is interesting. That's the kind of thing where it's wait and see. Concern is strong for how I feel about it, but there is the possibility they do it again and they screw it up.
I'm actually not as worried about them screwing it up as I am about the game stoppage time when you have a multitude of options.
The decision
that is actually
paralysis.
My greater concern.
Yeah.
And I think that is an inevitability because I think that's already going to happen in some cases. And I think when you're adding even one dungeon, like as you do it, the time is going to be exponential. And that's my concern.
Yeah, here's something I'm going to do as somebody running cube drafts and providing the cube. Even if my answer happens to be wrong, and for a lot of people making the suggestion, your answer is probably wrong. But just tell players this one's the best one, or just only provide one option.
Yeah.
It's your cube, your rules.
Yep. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on set mechanics before we move on to the actual factual cards?
There's actually quite a bit to talk about in the cards, so I think we should get down to that then.
Boom. Let's get going. We are known to take a really, really delicate amount of time, so I feel like we should get started with that. So we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, adventuring into the Forgotten Realms with white cards. Be back in just a moment. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to starcitygames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it on a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier. All right, Ryan, we have a number of white cards to talk about for Adventure in the Forgotten Realms. I would like to start, if that's okay with you.
I'll allow it.
Great. The reason I want to start is because in a twist, I believe that my favorite card from this entire set for Cube is the first card we're going to talk about.
Ooh.
And that card, which is going to be classic, fits into the classic designation of cubes, is Dancing Sword. Dancing Sword is an equipment for 1 and a white with equip 1, and equipped creature gets +2/+1. So a decent-ish equipment.
A trusty machete of sorts.
Trusty machete of sorts. Although better because you're getting the equip 1 is generally more
Right.
beneficial than equip 2. So, But then it also has the ability when equipped creature dies, you may have Dancing Sword become a 2/1 construct artifact creature with flying and ward 1. If you do, it isn't an equipment. I absolutely love this card. I think that the general rate for equipment is pretty decent. +2/+1 is pretty much exactly what you want for this amount, but that card wouldn't make it into cubes on its own. The ability to move this around until you have no more creatures, and then this simply becomes a 2/1 flyer that has ward 1. I think this card is a slam dunk in any cube that you are attempting to attack your opponent to kill them.
Yeah, it's very efficient at what it does. Only costs 2 to play, 1 to equip. You get something left over if the creature dies if you want it. If you already have some flyer to move it around, you probably keep bouncing it around, and then you could save this as like a sweeper protection. Your opponent finally has to cast Wrath of God. You still have a 2/1 to try to cross the finish line there. Seems quite powerful in that regard. I'm not sure, without having played with this card, which is better between it and the uncommon from Core Set 2020. Just the 2 mana is +1/+1, but it makes a 1/1 right away. Yeah, it's not immediately clear to me if making a token from the jump is better than letting the equipment turn into a creature later. My gut tells me the Ancestral Blade, but I do still like this card quite a bit.
I think that the fact that this gives an extra bump on attack is a huge deal.
Yeah, that is definitely significant.
I mean, that basically turns any creature into a threat. I feel like 3 power is generally like the kind of advanced threat area to get into for cube. Because pretty much every creature has 2 power. Very few creatures have less than 2 power in most cubes that you're interested in attacking with at all. So 3 is when you actually start to see like a return on your clock. And this turns everything, because it's an equipment, obviously, this is not anything new. But the fact that ultimately, like once you are out of creatures, or on the other side, if you don't have one in your hand, on the other side of a sweeper, you just get to turn this into a flyer on its own with no additional mana investment. I think that is a massive deal. I think it's a massive deal.
Yeah, and
I like Ancestral Blade.
It's only equip 1, so you're pretty likely to be able to get it on a creature, even if it takes a couple tries. Like your opponent, the decks that play this tend to have expendable bodies, so you probably will get to that point without too much difficulty. So I do like the card quite a bit. I'm not sure if it's going to make it into any of the major digital offerings. Probably the Arena Cubes at the very least. And I do think it's probably a pretty high pick for the white aggressive decks in the Arena Cubes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, considering that I believe that is the best deck with an asterisk. Assuming you don't have Field of the Dead in the draft, that's the best deck.
Yeah, and then it raises its claim for being the best deck if they cut Golos from the cube.
Yes, by a lot. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think this card is great. Obviously, I am the one, which is why I wanted to start, that put it into Classic. Ryan is cooler on it.
Good choice of words, because I think the card is incredibly cool.
It is very cool. All right, what do we have next?
Next, we have another really cool one. This one's a popular D&D reference, the Portable Hole. 1 white mana artifact. When Portable Hole enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until Portable Hole leaves the battlefield. So kind of a tiny little Oblivion Ring. Really good removal spell. Tends to be only particularly powerful cubes have removal quite as good as Swords to Plowshares. You more commonly see Path to Exile. Portable Hole, much better against a 1 or a 2 mana creature. Also an answer to Mana Rocks if you're playing a cube that has that sort of thing going on. Just a really nice, versatile removal spell. It's cheap, very good for controlling white decks, and depending on the matchup, also a powerful tool for white aggressive decks for clearing blockers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, the rate on this is just, I mean, this is as good as it gets, right?
Yeah, it's hard to beat 1 mana, 1 for 1.
Yeah, 1 mana, 1 for 1. 2 is kind of the magic number. Like, there's a significant amount of powerful 2-drop permanents in cubes across the board. A lot of creatures and artifacts specifically. This is gonna get them all. I guess there's a couple of like random things you could get that aren't, enchantment would be the only other thing. Or if they get Froggy at some point, and I guess you can get Wrenn and 6 with this. God, that's a beating.
Oh yeah.
If you cast this and get somebody's Wrenn and 6.
That's a good get for sure.
That is definitely a good get. Yeah, this is this card is literally nothing fancy. I do like that it's an artifact for what it's worth. I think there's more upside. You generally can take more advantage of it, but it's also easier to kill. But I would rather have more interaction. So
this is maybe an interaction for yesteryear, but you can grab us with a Trinket Mage. That's kind of cool.
That's true. Yeah. Hey, there's plenty of cubes that have Trinket Mage that will enjoy getting that. That's a strong play though, getting a Portable Hole with a Trinket Mage.
Yeah, maybe this is a reason to put Trinket Mage back in your cube if it found its way out. Trinket Mage is not necessarily a very exciting card for a peasant cube, but there's more tools for it than there's ever been. So maybe it's time for that second look.
Yeah, good way to put it. Okay. The next one, this is I actually just saw this card about an hour ago. As we are recording now. Monk of the Open Hand. This is a 1/1 for a single white elf monk, which I just now am reading for the first time. I did not realize it was an elf. That's a pretty cool creature typing. And it has the ability. Now, I won't skip it. Flurry of Blows, which means whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Monk of the Open Hand. The rate on this card is pretty good, and we are now. I really like this angle that we are going to with white of when you cast your second spell. We had talked about Clarion Spirit like months ago. That we both liked that card, but there's like white is kind of tough in isolation to pull that off. Well, when you add more cards, and this is a pretty aggressive creature, it doesn't take a whole lot, literally a single turn where you're casting 2 spells to turn this into a 2/2 for 1. It just has upside beyond that. So this is, I think, a very, very good white 1-drop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Clarion Spirit is a card that has impressed me the more that I've cubed with it, and I actually like Monk of the Open Hand a little bit more if you're in the market for that sort of thing. Kind of what I like about Clarion Spirit is it's great if your deck is trying to cantrip and the cube is about small ball effects and trying to snowball with some little things. It's a big feature of the Tempo Tubert, and that card's been pretty awesome in that environment. But then in other cubes where things go a little bit bigger and maybe you have to like wait until turn 4 to double spell, it can be a little dumpy. The quote unquote fail case for Monk of the Open Hand, it's always a 1 mana 1/1. and that is just fine. It generally is going to trade with 1 mana creatures there, and then it's pretty easy to watch it scale into the later game from there, especially if you're doing the cantripping thing. But the 1 mana 1/1 as opposed to a 2 mana 2/2, I like that a lot. To be fair and to be clear, I do like both cards, but this one does get me more excited.
I will, to me, if the fail rate for this, or the fail case for this, is being a 1 mana 1/1 and you're not winning, it is not Monk of the Open Hand's fault.
Right. Yeah. It's just like
if you don't have a turn that you're
drop.
not. Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, if you don't have a turn, you're not casting a single turn. You're not casting 2 spells. I get those spells. Well, not just in the context of Magic, but in the context of you had a deck you wanted to put Monk of the Open Hand in.
Right.
Meaning you want to be in a position to activate it, and you have not been able to activate it. That's generally not going to be the fault of Monk of the Open Hand.
Yeah, that is also absolutely true. Yeah, I'm a big fan of this card.
I am too. Yeah, I hope, honestly, it seems like they have kind of hit a little bit of a sweet spot for not card advantage, but recurring advantage for white with this mechanic, and I would like for them to continue to do so. I would love to have a suite of cards at varying mana costs that do this.
Yeah, the second spell of turn mechanic is really nice, and then as they find more clever ways to allow the white decks to cast multiple spells a turn, or even to draw extra cards, which they are actively working on, you'll see cards like this get even better.
Big time.
All right, but that is the third and final classic card for white in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. Let's talk about some custom cards. We'll start with Cleric Class. So Class is kind of a new enchantment type for this set. So they are enchantments, and they have the ability to level. So they start for their mana cost, and they are a level 1. And then I believe all of the ones in the set go up to level 3, leveled once at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And as a sorcery, you can pay the cost to level them. So for Cleric Class, for 1 white mana at level 1, if you would gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead. For 3 and a white, you level it to 2. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And for 4 and a white, it goes to level 3. When this class becomes level 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You gain life equal to its toughness. So this is generally going to be for the kind of cube that's really interested in a life gain kind of thing, in a Johnny's Pridemate and a Soul Attendant kind of strategy. And then it also, in addition to buffering those strategies, you just kind of have this resurrection effect tacked onto there, which can be pretty useful in those decks because there's only so many cards once you are invested in life gain that actually can generate card advantage.
Yeah. It's a huge amount of mana to do that, but that's not really the point. You're not playing it with the intent of getting to level 3. I think you're generally playing it with the intent to get to level 2 when it fits into your curve. And level 3 is when you are no longer deploying additional threats. But the fact that it's only one step away from level 2 from a mana perspective means that it is still going to happen a decent amount of times. And I don't know. These are my favorite designs of this entire set. Are the class enchantments.
Yeah.
I think they're brilliant.
This template is very cool, and a number of the specific cards are very excellent implementations.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of these. I like this card. I think that we are continuing to get good, just actual good cards that care about life gain, and I think that is a very fun thing as we continue to go along. We've now branched into like 3 colors for that, white obviously being the prime color, but black and green as well. So I think that anytime that you get a card that has any sort of power level attached to it that cares about life gain, you should take a closer look, because we're getting to the kind of the tipping point where that can start to be a major part of a lot of cubes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I specifically worked on, but it has already been a feature of some of the arena cubes, and there's just more and more cards for it. Definitely if you are in that more limited card pool, new card face kind of stuff, then it is likely that there's good support for the life gain deck for you.
Yeah. Fun thing, this does gain you infinite life with a sacrifice outlet and kitchen finks when you're on level 2.
Ooh.
Hey there.
There's just more and more infinite kitchen finks combos all the time, huh?
And if the kitchen finks dies, you can always get it back with level 3.
That's pretty nice, actually. I'm into that.
Yeah. Always like a good little kitchen finks. Kitchen finks murders redcap. Those are two pretty good creatures. So yeah. So this is this nice little combo with kitchen finks if you're into such things. Okay. Next card, Dragon's Disciple. Uh-oh. Oh, here it is. Okay. I lost it for a second. Okay. Dragon's Disciple. It is a 1/3 for 1 and a white, a human monk. As Dragon's Disciple enters the battlefield, you may reveal a dragon card from your hand. If you do, or if you control a dragon, aka the Dragons of Tarkir mechanic, Dragon's Disciple enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, which would make it a 2/4 for 2, which is a pretty good rate. And dragons you control have Ward 1. And Ward, a returning mechanic from Strixhaven, means it is basically the Frost Titan ability. So Ward 1 would mean counter any spell or ability that targets this unless its controller pays 1 generic mana. So Dragon's Disciple, the upside for this is it turns into a 2/4 for 2. And I think the Ward 1 is a nice little bonus, but that's generally not the reason that you're going to be playing this card. However, you do need to have a dragon, and this is a white card. That is, if this was in red, and you could like regularly reveal dragons or have that as a more prominent part of your cube, I would be all over this card. And I'm cooler on it now just because I think that's slightly harder to pull off being in the color that it's in.
Mm-hmm. And this set does have a bit of a dragon theme, not surprising for the Dungeons and Dragons set. And I've messed around with dragons some in cube, partly because I think Sarkhan Fireblood is cool as hell. And it's a really important kind of hole for designing dragon decks when it comes to cube. And it's that there's very few cheap dragons.
Yeah.
So a card that really fits mechanically well into a dragon deck that is pretty cheap, while in itself is not a dragon, does help to make that like just dragon decks more cohesive and gives you more things to care about on the low side of the curve. And that makes it so they're more reasonable to play, you know. No offense to David McDarby, but I like it when my cubes have 1-drops, but then also support higher mana curves. I'm not at the level where if I want to do dragons, I'm going to eliminate cheap cards. I just enjoy playing cheap cards.
Yeah.
And so the cheap cards that really play well with this, and we do have a dragon from this set. That's a relatively inexpensive white dragon we're getting to. We just got the Eternalized White Dragon from Modern Horizons 2, which is pretty solid for a white dragon deck. And that's the kind of thing that gets a little bit better all the time.
And we did just call Timeless Dragon from Modern Horizons 2 classic.
Yep.
In our last review. So there you go. That's true. I mean, a 2/4 is like pretty far above rate as far as any creature goes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's huge.
So, yeah. That is, I would imagine if you play this and you reveal a dragon and you're playing against any sort of aggressive deck, you have done a lot of work to winning that game.
Yes, yeah, that'll really help you bridge the gap to start casting your 4+ mana dragons.
Yeah, big time.
All right.
What do we have next?
We have Flumph. So 1 and a white, 0/4 jellyfish with Defender and Flying. Whenever Flumph is dealt damage, you and target opponent each draw a card. This seems like a Commander collusion kind of card to me.
Sure does. A lot of collusion going on. This is definitely going to be a card that is going. It's not necessarily going to be a Commander staple from a power level perspective. It will be a Commander staple from a collusion perspective. There's no better word than
Yeah, I have a difficult time seeing this card or just this let's all draw cards kind of thing, or let's both draw cards rather, for a 1v1 game being particularly good in cube for the 1v1 games, but very clearly some multiplayer implications here.
I can't believe this doesn't say whoever dealt it, if an opponent dealt the damage. It's like, oh, I'll block, and me and Ryan will draw a card and Steven doesn't get to draw a card.
Yeah, that seems like that should be how it works kind of flavorfully, but I like it mechanically where if somebody attacks you, you give somebody else a card. You're like, hey, I'll give you the card if you attack this jerk.
Yeah, this is it's so, I'll give him credit. This card is there's so few words for the amount of arguing that this card will cause. And I think that there is a lot to be said about that from a design standpoint. Yeah, so multiplayer, this is a slam dunk. This card is going to be a blast, or it's not. If you don't control it, it's going to be miserable because you're going to have to be fighting over who makes friends with the flump, and I don't know if that's where you want to be or not. All right, the next one. Oh my gosh, this card is very interesting. Grandmaster of Flowers. This is a legendary planeswalker, Bahamut. Is that correct?
I'm gonna lose some of my D&D cred. I believe it's Bahamut, but I could be wrong.
Bahamut. Okay. Legendary planeswalker Bahamut. For 2 white with 3 loyalty. And Bahamut is a dragon, right?
A dragon god.
Obviously. A dragon god, because as long as Grandmaster of Flowers has 7 or more loyalty counters on him, he's a 7/7 dragon god creature with flying and indestructible. Okay, so before we even get to the rest of the card, I am under the impression, based on how I understand it from playing on Magic the Gathering Arena with Sarkhan from War of the Spark, that once you turn planeswalkers into creatures, they are no longer planeswalkers, but they still maintain the planeswalker abilities and can use those abilities as needed. But they can no longer be attacked. And they're also not planeswalkers anymore.
This is my understanding.
Okay. That is also my understanding based on Sarkhan the Masterless is the card. Because I've done that. I've activated that. And then they can still activate the planeswalkers abilities if I have not activated them this turn, even though they're no longer planeswalkers. So once you get this card to 7, you can still use its abilities, but it basically cannot die. Anyway, 3 loyalty starts with +1 target creature without first strike, double strike, or vigilance can't attack or block until your next turn. Also +1, search your deck or graveyard for a card named Monk of the Open Hand, which is a card that obviously we like. Reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. Now, this is obviously a little bit Nissa Ravane, getting Nissa's chosen. However, the fact that you can just pull these out of your graveyard is pretty great too.
Mm-hmm.
Although I guess Nissa's chosen shuffles back into your deck. No matter. So honestly, I've not had a lot of time to think about this card, one. And it is a card I feel like I need to think about. So Ryan, maybe you have had some more time to think about this one.
Yeah, and I think that what it does is powerful, but not overwhelmingly so. I think for the 4-mana white planeswalker slot, this is not in contention with Gideon Ally of Zendikar or Elspeth Knight Errant. But it is still a powerful card. It's a 4-mana planeswalker with some ability to protect itself, and you get up to that 7/7 dragon. Some people also do kind of custom like house rules for their cube when a card names another card. So I think that Monk of the Open Hand is just a card that's worth a slot in your cube. So for this card, I wouldn't really want to see anything like that, because I don't think that Monk of the Open Hand needs help in that regard. But if you do get both, there's some interesting synergy there. And I think that this is just kind of a card where if you kind of like planeswalkers, and if you're like me, you like the way planeswalkers play a lot better than the way enchantments play, and you have this kind of pillow fort kind of control game pattern that you're interested in, I think this card has much better play patterns rather than a lot of we dog on Moat specifically a lot, but cards of that nature are like cards that are closer to Grandmaster of Flowers quite a bit. So I don't think it's a power level home run, but I do think it's relatively powerful and pretty interesting. So it would be for like a mid-tier power level cube for me.
I don't think I would play this card unless I house rules it to address the second ability. Because if you only have one Monk of the Open Hand and you have to draft it also, where that's Monk of the Open Hand is a more desirable card to draft than this card. And that is usually the more difficult thing when it's in that direction. If Grandmaster of Flowers was the more desirable card and it was easier to pick up the Monk in a draft, then I think that is points in its favor. But since it's the other way around, it's a tougher sell for me unless I'm doing some errataing on my own.
What if the rule is if you draft the Monk of the Open Hand, you get the Grandmaster of Flowers?
Why though? Monk is so powerful. Like Monk is already a good card. That's kind of the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that card's already good. Like, do we need to make that card better?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would be like a way you get people to actually play the Grandmaster, where you won't have any problem the other way around.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It is also weird having the Planeswalker in your cube with really functionally only one ability. But again, that's why this is custom, and then it's kind of a lower power control kind of card.
It is a very cool card, and it's a hell of a mini game to try to get this to 7.
Yep.
All right. What's next?
Next, we have Guardian of Faith. This is a 3-mana, 3/2 Spirit Knight, costs 1 white. It has Flash and Vigilance. When Guardian of Faith enters the battlefield, any number of other target creatures you control phase out. So you treat them and anything attached to them as though they don't exist until their controller's next turn when they phase in. So this is another one of those creatures, kind of like similar in the vein to Glorious Protector, where you could use it to protect yourself from sweepers. This is actually a little bit more effective at protecting a creature from a spot removal spell. Maybe you could get a creature out of an inopportune combat. And this is also just a solid body for ambushing things in combat. I think this card, the only reason I didn't put this in as a classic card is because there's a lot of congestion at the 3-mana spot on the curve. But this is one that I would not really bat an eye at to see in a cube.
That's exactly how I feel. This is like, I feel like this card it's gonna be really tough sell to make it into one of my cubes. But if this were in a cube, I would not feel bad about drafting and playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in particular, if my curve's coming together, if I get all the 1s and 2s early, I'm very happy to have this as my 3.
Yeah, and I think white creatures with Flash are among some of the most effective. Like, I think Flash plays incredibly well in white compared to other colors, just based on how the aggressive decks in white generally function. So I'm always happy to see more white Flash creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when the body is large enough. This is not really a home run for a blue-white control deck, but if you're geared more towards blue-white tempo as your blue-white archetype, then this card can start to be really excellent in a deck like that, where you're leaving up counter spells or threats.
Yep. I think I would rather this be a 2/3 than a 3/2 in a rare case, but either way, it's a 3/2. It's going to trade down some, which is not great, but
yeah,
it's providing a lot more, so I can't be too gripey about the power and toughness.
Yeah, 2 toughness vigilance is not the best juxtaposition, but everything else put together is giving you a lot.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about a card that is better positioned that does have vigilance, and that's. Sorry, give me a moment. Icing Death. I thought it was just Ice Death until right now. Icing Death. Frost Tyrant. This is a legendary dragon creature that is a 4/3 for 2 white with flying and vigilance. When Icing Death Frost Tyrant dies, create Icing Death Frost Tongue, a legendary white equipment artifact token with equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls and equip 2. There's a lot of words. Sometimes I feel like I should read, maybe for this set, have read some of these cards out loud to myself before trying to do it on the podcast, but here we are. This is a quite effective body. I mean, it's a 4/3 for 4 flying vigilance. It's legendary, which is largely irrelevant here, and it leaves behind a semi reasonable equipment.
Yeah, given the fact that that's leftovers, that equipment is solid. Very cool flavor. This is something that happens now and again in a D&D campaign. You know, dragons are around and they have large bones and they are magical creatures. So kind of having a weapon that's made from the remains of a dragon is a very cool, flavorful thing that comes up sometimes. I love that. 4/3 is a little fragile. It's not too tough to get through. It 3 toughness creature, but it only costs 4. So this is once again not competing with the best 4 mana white cards, but it's very cool. And we talked about dragons just as an archetype to support in Cube. This is another thing that helps branch it into white. And 4 mana is a spot where you do have some openings on the curve. There's more opportunities for cheaper stuff, but the fact that this is white helps it fit in there. And it does some cool stuff like equipment matters is another thing that shows up in Cube, but you can only really put so many equipments in a deck. There's diminishing returns on that. So having a creature with some evasion that can pick up an equipment and then can also be an equipment for some of your stuff that, I don't know, cares about being equipped or equips for free. This card does offer some stuff. It's just kind of all specific stuff that's a little fragile.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's kind of where I land. Like I can, for all of the things that this offers, I can think of another white card that costs 4 that is doing the thing better. Mm-hmm. Like immediately comes to mind, like Halvar, God of Battle, is kind of like operating in the same space, but I just think that Halvar is generally a better card. Mm-hmm. But even still, like this has flying. This is I don't know of another 4 power, 4 mana creature in white that has flying. So this does have a space unto itself, and maybe I could be forgetting one. But I don't think that there is. I think this is the only.
What's the stat line on Sublime Archangel?
Sublime Archangel is a 4/3 for 4 also. Okay, you got me.
Yeah, that card's probably quite a bit better than this card, but
Sublime Archangel.
Yeah,
it is way less cool, but it probably is going to do a better job of killing your opponent.
Yes, I agree on both counts.
Yeah. Okay. I think I also have experienced Icing Death. In my youth, probably 8 or 9, I had a entire little carton of birthday cake icing all to myself in the
afternoon. I was wondering where you're going with that.
Never again. I hate as an adult. I hate icing, and I think that it is specifically from that specific instance of Icing Death.
Yeah, it could also be that
I didn't experience the death, but I prayed for it. I wanted it to come.
All right, let's move on. Next, we have Nadar, Selfless Paladin. Now, here's a cheap dragon, 2 and a white for a 3/3 legendary Dragon Knight. It has Vigilance. Whenever Nadar, Selfless Paladin, enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeons. You choose one of the 3 dungeons. And then other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon. So you have an Anthem effect later. There's a fast track. The fastest dungeon path involves you venturing 3 times, completing it and getting a 4/4. But if you take the fast track, you get one-sided smallpoxed. So I don't really anticipate players going down that path too often, but you have some lines to get there in 4. But what you have here is a 3 mana 3/3 dragon and knight, both potentially relevant creature types. This is Vigilance. And just you get some value even if you haven't completed a dungeon. Just venturing gives you something for your trouble. So I like this card quite a bit. It's again in a spot, 3 mana. This is why this is custom and not classic. But this card does some stuff that you can convince yourself that you care about.
This is to me like one of the premier venturing into the dungeon cards. Mm-hmm. In this set, the benefit you get for completing one is pretty huge. A 3/3 for 3 that Glorious Anthems your team. That's solid.
Oh yeah.
Yep. All right. Another one I should have read out loud prior to the podcast. Oswald Fiddlebender. It is a 2/2 gnome artificer for 1 and a white. And it has magical tinkering, which means, as everyone knows, pay a white and tap it and sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. So you are birthing pod for artifacts with Mr. Fiddlebender here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's going to be lines you could pursue just in the average vintage cube. Like if you just put that card in there, I don't think you would necessarily play this card for that ability. It'd probably just show up as 2/2 with no text in the mono white beatdown deck. But when you do start to cater to this card, there's a lot of cool artifacts that I have played. I guess maybe Block Constructed is the only place, but it did show up in Modern. So I never played Ironworks combo in Modern, and that deck played Ichor Wellspring. I played Ichor Wellspring in Scars of Mirrodin Block Constructed, so I have a lot of attachment to that card for that reason. And it's a card that doesn't really do enough on its own, not remotely, for a cube, but the number of cards that synergize with it kind of goes up all the time. Anything that sacrifices an artifact, and you could just go up this chain. Some people do. It's not super common, but I've seen that people do Ironworks combo in their cube, and this card lets you go just Wellspring into Scrap Trawler into Clan Ironworks, which is a pretty good chain.
It is. I would say that if you have those cards, you'd have to end up with old Fiddlebender towards the end of the draft.
I realized as I was naming off just all those cards that I sounded like the flavor text on, like literally the flavor text on Johnny Combo Player from Unhinged.
Yeah.
Oh, and my Clan Ironworks.
Yeah, you have the 3 best ones. I would imagine that the card Glory Seeker is probably going to fit cubes better than Oswald. Which is because it's a 2/2 for 2, but it's a human and soldier, where Oswald is a gnome and
it
artificer.
Won't distract you with all this extra text.
Yeah. I wish that this was like bonded fetch. Like it didn't have haste. You could attack immediately, but you'd activate the ability immediately.
Sure.
Like, I wish we weren't so scared of doing that. This is a pretty a pretty niche card. And the reason it's not Birthing Pod is because you can play Birthing Pod and activate it immediately. Oswald must rest a turn and then will be ready for sacrificing, and that is generally going to be wildly too slow. Yeah.
Again, this is custom. Only try this at home if you have a plan.
Yes.
But yeah, I have a plan. It takes a couple minutes to explain it, but I have a plan.
Do you think that the deck that you described drafting, you would be playing white and be playing Oswald Fiddlebender in the deck?
Well, you're asking some pretty hard-hitting questions. I didn't know we were doing hardball journalism today.
Sorry. Okay, we can move on to the next. You don't have to answer that one out loud. You can move on to the next card.
Let's move on to the Paladin class. This is another one of those class enchantments for 1 white mana. On level 1, spells your opponents cast during your turn cause 1 generic mana more to cast. You can move it to level 2 for 2 and a white, and then creatures you control get +1/+1. And then from there, for 4 and a white, whenever you attack until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +1/+1 for each other attacking creature and gains double strike. So this is a little bit inefficient for a Glorious Anthem, and you don't get a body with it the same way you do with Tithe Taker, but that's one card that's maybe a little bit on the fringe for cube, and one card that I really like. I'll let you guess which one, but I think you have enough stapled together here to make a pretty strong card.
For a second, I thought this was an uncommon, and I was going to be like, this is a slam dunk in a common cube.
Oh, but for sure.
But it is a rare, unfortunately. I do like this. It does. And again, I apologize for not being on point for flavor. The abilities seem very disjointed to me.
So there's kind of a lot going on there. There's different fighting styles with paladins, and they're good at fighting with other people, supporting the cause, blah blah blah. Specifically in Anthem is maybe a little bit off, and that is a criticism some people have on the set. The flavor is not necessarily spot on, but in general, it makes for better and more compelling magic cards if they just do good magic effects.
Yeah, and all of these effects are pretty decent. It takes you a bunch of mana to get there. But I think for a lower powered cube, this is actually like it's a pretty decent mana sink. I mean, that last ability is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to think, even if you're like, even if you attack, even if it attacks alone, worst case scenario gets double strike. But then once you start adding another creature, you're getting into like Embercleave like territory or better.
Right, and just that spells your opponent cast during your turn costs one more. That's that Thalia-esque kind of protection. That gums up combat too.
Yeah.
When your opponent's spells just cost more and what you have going on is better, you have that Anthem effect and then you have this other pump effect, you are just kind of pressuring your opponent more with the average card and they have to spend more to interact with you whatsoever. So that can break open combat in very significant ways. Unfortunately, like you said, it's not an uncommon. That would really break things open in a peasant cube, but it can still be pretty impactful in a lower powered or non-rarity restricted cube.
Yeah, I agree with that. Honestly, the more white flash creatures we get, the more I'm going to like this card.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I stand. I think if you can have a bunch of like white flash creatures, which again I think is a really great angle for that color, then this card becomes more and more attractive to where you can like tax people very cheaply and put creatures on the battlefield with them being able to not interact with them quite as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, moving on. Ranger's Hawk. This is a 1/1 for 1 white bird with flying. So Suntail Hawk stats just to start. And you can tap 3 and tap it, and tap another untapped creature you control, venture into the dungeon, activate this only as a sorcery. This is a nice little, I mean, I actually think that like cheap flying men, Suntail Hawk creatures are in lower powered cubes actually pretty reasonable. And when you have this in the later game, when that is no longer good, taking this and your other worst creature and just venturing into the dungeon every turn for 3 mana, that's pretty solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this card's actually significant for pauper cubes and some of the other lower powered cubes, just because one of the big weaknesses of white is all the way down to common. You have excellent card advantage spells in blue and black, and a few even in red, and you get a little bit in green. I guess the Monarch mechanic technically gave some to white, but that can be rocky, and also not everybody even likes it very much. But just kind of a card that just on plan, you can beat them up with your 1-drop, or you can try to generate value in the dungeon. It gives you some stuff to do early and late, which is very desirable for white in those cubes.
Yeah, I mean, playing this on turn 1 and getting in as long as you possibly can, and then when you can no longer profitably attack, you start providing card advantage in a different way. I think this is great. I fully agree. This is a great pauper white card, pauper and peasant.
Speaking of pauper white cards, our next card is You Hear Something on Watch. This is a 1 and a white instant. Choose one. You can rouse the party. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn, or you can set off traps, and the spell deals 5 damage to target attacking creature. So, little offense, little defense. +1/+1, not the most exciting, but it is an instant, and the kind of cube that wants a card like this probably has a fair amount of token generators. And oftentimes pauper cubes that would play a card like this have like a neck snap effect anyway. So the fact that you have this one or the other with this is pretty valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think even if we're ignoring the choose one, if you just look at the set off the trap side, dealing 5 to an attacking creature for 2 mana, historically you're getting 4 damage. Like Gideon's Reproach and other cards. 5 is actually a much bigger deal, and that's the sweet spot for those cubes of creatures that can like escape a lot of like damage dealing spells that kill them, because a lot of those are at 4. So I actually think this is a pretty reasonable card just on that alone, and the fact that you get the other mode to it, which I imagine you're going to do that less, but when you do it, it's generally going to be better than the other side. So
I'm all into it.
Yeah, I'm for it too. All right. Next up, Teleportation Circle. 3 and a white. It's an enchantment. the beginning of your end step, exile up to one target artifact or creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is like a Conjurer's Clause, except in white, and you can get artifacts. I love blinky stuff, so I'm about this. I like redundancy with that. And even though blinky stuff usually is like too like overwhelmingly value oriented or too slow for like the most powerful cubes, I think it is one of the most fun things that for me to be able to do in cubes. So I'm very attracted to this card.
That's another combo with Ichor Wellspring.
Yeah, that artifact side. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah, this kind of stuff. I mean, some people are really into Blink. I don't think that very many people are just a little bit into it. Like, it's a fully supported thing in a lot of cubes, and this seems like a auto include in many of those cubes.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I'm all about this card.
All right. Next, we have the Book of Exalted Deeds. This card is fancy. It has a lot of pips. So right off the bat, Justin and I maybe not super on board with it. However, I couldn't in good conscience leave it off the list. So it costs white for legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained 3 or more life this turn, create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying. And then for white, tap it and exile the Book of Exalted Deeds. Put an enlightened counter on target angel. It gains, you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. Activate only as a sorcery. So you have another card that cares about life gain. You get paid off with 3/3s. You can gain enough life every turn. And then just this transformation to say, all right, this angel has been a good little angel, and now it's a platinum angel. Very flavorful thing, like evocative of Dungeons and Dragons. You completed your big quest. Now you're a more powerful angel. I like this card quite a lot, outside of the fact that its casting cost and its abilities, both of them are not things I'm generally interested for cube. Just the card as it exists, I like it for what it does. I just don't like what it does.
There is a commonly played angel that makes a lot of aggro decks, though, that this is quite good with.
Are you talking about Baneslayer Angel?
I'm talking about Mutavault.
Oh, well, Mutavault has a difficult time casting this.
It does, but if you can get there, and you can turn Mutavault into an angel and then put this counter on it, Strip Mine and Wasteland are the only things that are essentially gonna be able to remove it.
I didn't come up with that right away, and I feel silly that I guessed Baneslayer Angel, but that is a quirky little interaction.
Yeah. Look, if you're gonna put this in your cube, you're looking for quirky interactions. So
that is true. You got to be a fan of pips for this one.
Yeah, and I am not. I'll never ever put this in a cube. That being said, if you are the person out there that's working on the Devotion cube, this is a cool one to put in that.
Yeah,
you're probably going to be doing something with life gain.
This definitely seems like a Commander cube card to me.
Oh man,
I don't think it's always going to make decks, but it's the kind of card that you see and you think, oh, what can I do with this?
Yeah. This would be really cool if it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Last card for white and custom and in general. You're ambushed on the road. An instant for a single white. Choose one. Make a retreat. Return target creature you control to its owner's hand. Or stand and fight. Target creature gets +1/+3 until end of turn. This is a combat trick in pretty much every sense of the word.
Yes.
If your creature's going to die, all right, back to the hand. If your creature's not going to die, all right, +1/+3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the modality on a combat trick there. I come really close to liking a lot of cards that have this make a retreat ability. Like I am almost there on Shepherd of the Lost, which is the adventure creature that's a 2-mana 3/1. You lose me a little bit on that one because I always just want to cast a 2-mana 3/1. But this combination here, return a creature to hand or have that pump spell, so you have reason to hold on to it, and you should get use out of one or the other in the kind of cubes that you would put this card into. I like this card quite a bit.
Okay. I'm not as warm on this card as the other modal common. You hear something on watch. I like that one quite a bit. This one, that being said, I know in practice this is going to be better than it looks on paper because these type of effects always are.
Yeah, definitely. Just the range of things that giving +1/+3 allows a creature to survive is pretty broad.
There's most everything.
Right. And then it's not really desirable to put a card that says return a creature you control to its hand in your deck. But because you have that pretty solid protection spell attached to it, then you enter this territory where, I don't know, if it comes to it, you can use this to insulate yourself a little bit against a sweeper. More likely, if you're using it to return a creature with enter the battlefield ability.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Ryan, is that those the only white cards that we want to talk about? Is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's just some cards that are charming, but I think that's the list of cards that I'm more actively excited for.
Okay. The only other card, Plate Armor, which is a white equipment. If you're doing the equipment thing, that is a pretty cool card to do, but it's very parasitic with equipment, so pretty narrow. But I do think it's a very cool card to from a design perspective.
Yeah, that one in Paladin Shield, I kind of looked over them. I guess we're mentioning them now, but the space is a little bit crowded at this point, but they are interesting options for equipment heavy cubes. But you're probably doing the Scryfall search for every equipment that exists if you're working on that anyway, so you'll come across them.
Yep, for sure. Okay, in that case, that is all we have for white. So we are going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into blue for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
What's up, gamers? Taking a break from the pod here to talk to you about Star City Games Premium. Now, I know many of you are already premium members. That's awesome. You're awesome. Thank you for that. If you are not already enrolled in SCG Premium, we need to talk. You are leaving a value on the table for $7.99 a month. You get access to 5% off of Magic Sealed product, 10% off of all Magic singles, 15% off of supplies. Now, I know that I'm talking to a lot of Cube owners here. I know that you're going to buy more sleeves. You know you are going to save this money right back on sleeves alone. So that's reason enough for you to enroll. But I am not done yet, not by a long shot. You also get tons of exclusive content from a fantastic stable of writers. We're talking about Jerry Thompson, Paulo Vitor Rosa, Patrick Sullivan, Autumn Burchett, Brad Nelson, Sheldon Memory, Ross Merriam, Todd Anderson, Shaheen Sarani, Michael Majors, Ryan Sachs, Ari Lax, Dominic Harvey, Cedric Phillips. The list goes on and on. My stuff, you can get that every week for free. You're welcome. But now I am asking a favor. Go ahead, get enrolled for SCG Premium. Go to starcitygames.com/join-premium. Sign up today. And let's get back to the podcast.
All right. Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, blue cards. We just covered all of the white cards as usual. We said a lot of words about them, and I imagine we're going to do the same thing for blue. Since I took the last one, Ryan, you can start off on this.
So we only have one classically powerful blue card in this set, and we might disagree on this. We'll get to that in a minute. But we have Imrith. Man, I am just squandering every bit of D&D credit I maybe accumulated at the top of the show. But I believe IYM Rith. I'm pretty confident Rith comes out. Imrith Desert Doom, 3 blue, 5/5 legendary dragon with flying. It has Ward 4 as long as it's untapped. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Then if you have fewer than 3 cards in hand, you draw cards equal to the difference. So in a lot of ways, evocative of Dragon Lord Ogit. That was a card that did show up, and I actually lost to at least once in Mengu Cube, which was just Andrea Mengucci's vintage cube. So literally just a cube with Black Lotus. And this is a mono blue version, so a little bit more room in the cube for this kind of card. Ward 4, not quite as good as Hexproof, but pretty much the same in a lot of spots. And then the big thing, you have to attack to get value anyway. And it's pretty rare when it comes to a blue controlling deck that you would want to use a counterspell to protect your threat. And I think that the fact that this card kind of rewards you for being lower on cards in hand, for using your resources more proactively, is actually a big point in its favor as well, on top of just being a monocolored card, because you can just spend all your counter spells protecting it when it is vulnerable. It only takes a couple hits to beat your opponent, and it's just going to gas up your hand the whole time too.
No, I think this card's great. I realized as I was making notes earlier today, all of the cards I added, which you may have noted, I put all as custom, and that's just because I copy and pasted the text, and I just forgot to change them. No, this card's great.
Oh, nice.
I'm all about it.
That makes that easy.
I'm a huge Dragonlord Ogit fan. I actually have a Dragonlord Ogit commander deck. Yeah, so it is traditional blue-white control, and I like to slowly kill everyone with Dragonlord Ogit.
So you're not going to put this in your Dragonlord Ogit deck?
No, I will not, because I that would be disrespectful to Dragonlord Ogit.
Fair enough.
That being said, Dragonlord Ogit is a blue-white card in cubes that is at a mana cost that it makes it very difficult to find its home in cubes, not from a power level perspective, but just kind of the context of generally like what those colors are doing, and based on just what it's fighting against. Mm-hmm. So when you have a mono blue version, it's significantly easier to make this into a cube. And even though I think the text on Dragonlord Ogit is a little bit better than this card, I think it's pretty marginal. While I do agree with what you're saying about like exhausting your hand so you can draw back up to 3, I think in most cases I would rather just anticipate when I hit someone. But either way, we're splitting hairs, and I think both of the cards are great, and this one is significantly easier to cast and significantly easier to fit into your section that is a monocolored section in your cube.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a general note on my evaluations, to the extent that it's possible, even though I will often dog on a card that costs 2 mana and only technically replaces itself and like question if it was worth the card, I do, in spots like this, possibly overvalue card advantage. The idea of drawing 2 cards excites me a lot more than I anticipate.
And that's fair. I think let's see. So you're attacking on turn 6 at best. I think it's pretty close. I think the later in the game you go, you're generally wanting to anticipate, because you are trying to find a card rather than just any 2 cards.
Well, what if you just draw all 3, Justin?
You could. You're right. It's just, well, if you're just drawing all 3, then you're drawing all 3. And that's why I said, like, I think marginally I'm on the side of the anticipatability, because I just think that first of all, you're anticipating 100% of the time. And I would say in most cases, you are drawing a 1 card with this card.
Yeah, I anticipate certainly much better than draw 1 card. There can be no argument there.
Yeah, and the times that you draw more than 1 with this, if you hit with it, you are doing real good.
Oh yeah, because
once it's tapped and the shields are down, and you go to that trigger and you've protected it, that's going to feel pretty good. It's going to feel debilitating for your opponent if you have like 2 counter spells in your hand and you're at 3 cards and they try to kill it and you counter twice, and then draw 2. That's gonna. I imagine you're probably not going to deal lethal with this very often.
Yeah, your opponent will have lost interest in the game well before that.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. All right. Yeah, this card's great. Okay, next up, and that's the only classic card that we have. So all the rest of these are in the custom grouping. Now we have our first roll of D20 card. This is one I actually like quite a bit. Contact Other Plane, an instant for 3 and a blue, and it starts with roll a D20. If the result is 1 through 9, you draw 2 cards, so it's inspiration. If the result is 10 through 19, you scry 2, then draw 2, so behold the multiverse. And then if you roll a 20, you scry 3, then draw 3, which is another card.
Yeah, that's like...
that does that.
The like source, the addendum. There might be a card that always does it, but I know that there is an addendum to uses ingenuity.
Yeah, I think I was going to say like Graven Lore, which you have to pay snow mana to do. Either way, if you roll a 20 on this, it's pretty great. Yeah, I mean, in common uncommon cubes, I think it's just a slam dunk.
Yeah, it rules. About 45% of the time, it's inspiration. Anytime you get more, it's very cool. And you get to roll that D20, which is exciting. I'm into that.
Yeah, inspiration with upside I think is good. You know, like in common cubes, if I would put as many like, you know, Glimmer of Genius or Behold the Multiverse as I possibly could, but most of them are not with those effects. With it would have additional effects beyond the inspiration are generally not common. So this being a common is really great.
Yep. Right, next we have Demi-Lich. I think that there are quite a lot of people that are more excited about this card than I am, but let's tell you what it does and get to that later. So it costs blue. It's a 4/3 skeleton wizard, and it costs a blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. Whenever Demi-Lich attacks, exile up to one target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it. You may cast the copy, and you may cast Demi-Lich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard, in addition to paying its costs. Now, I think that most of the spells that you cast to reduce this card's cost 1 blue mana anyway, or just more mana than that. So I think it's unrealistic to get a deal on this. And then really heavy on pips. The ability's fine. It's a lot more demanding. I'm kind of getting vibes. I'm getting Scab Ruinator vibes from this card. I think it's harder to make worth than maybe it seems at first blush, and not really worth it either. The idea I had in the shower today was a cube where every Gruul card was just replaced with Manamorphose. Now, I think Demi-Lich would be very good in Manamorphose cube, but unlikely to be a contender in most other spots.
Look, you can make Wizards, you can reduce the pips on the card, but I see them on there. And I know the reality of the situation, okay? It's still a lot of pips, and the magical Christmas land necessary to make this card even like good at all is significant. Like at its best, you are casting 4 instants and sorceries, and then if it's in your graveyard and you cast 4 instants and sorceries, you can basically exile those and play it for free. In what world are you in a position where you're casting 4 instants and sorceries and you're like, you know what I want to do? I want to put a 4/3 on the battlefield. Do something. You've done the thing already. You've cast 4 instants and sorceries. Now in Constructed, a little bit different. You can work with this card more in older formats where you might be able to string together a bunch of stuff. But even then, I think that it's overstated of how powerful it is.
So this is actually a card that prompted one of my favorite bits of Magic player behavior. It's when this card was previewed, a bunch of people, and some of them, to their credit, were joking, but a bunch of people said, unban Gataxian Probe, or it comes up now and again where people say, can you imagine Gataxian Probe with this card? And it's like the 30th best thing you could do if Gataxian Probe were legal.
Yeah.
Could you imagine playing a really broken card with this piece of shit? Like, yeah, I guess I could, but why would I do that?
I don't know. They also just printed Murktide Regent, okay? Let's not forget about that card just because it's been out for 3 days, because it's about 500 times better than Demi-Lich.
Right.
And that's I might be being mean to Murktide Regent with only 500 times. I mean, this is a hard pass for me.
Divide by 0 to get that comparison.
Yeah. Someone will put this in their cube. If you're the person that puts this in their cube because you're like, Ryan and Justin are idiots, I want to put this in my cube, and I want you to come back after you've played it, and I want you to tell me the best story in a 3-month span that this card has created. And if you put it in because you think we're wrong, we can't hold you to this, but you just have to be an honorable person. You have to keep it in your queue for 3 months. Anything less than 3 months and we win.
It's another card where people would put it in their cube and somebody would draft it like pretty highly because they assume that it's at all supportable.
Supported.
And then they like show you like, what did you first pick? And they like grab their sideboard and are like, the deck just didn't come together.
Yeah, of course it didn't. Oh, okay. Anyway, a card that ironically beats Demi-Lich 100 times out of 100 in a 1-to-1 situation. Dragon Turtle. This is a 3/5 for 1 blue. It is, as you can imagine, creature type is a dragon turtle. And it has flash. Its ability is Drag Below. When Dragon Turtle enters the battlefield, tap it and up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. They don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. I think this is like for lower powered cubes, I think this is kind of like a fun combat trick. Like it's an ice that you ice something, and then at the once you go through a turn cycle, you end up with a 3/5.
Mm-hmm.
I think in any sort of like any higher power cubes, I would never play this. This size is good, but the fact that you don't get to untap with it immediately, or rather, your opponent gets to untap with their creature before you get to untap with yours, means that it's
so if you play it on their turn,
that's not the case.
yeah,
if you play it on their turn, that's not the case. Yeah.
But all the same, you're kind of paying a lot just for a creature with some stats. It's a cheaper dragon, which is what I really like about it, and it's incredibly cool.
It is very cool.
Yeah, that's where I'm at on the Dragon Turtle.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting card. Like I said, if you have a lower power cube, I think this could be a fun, reasonable card.
All right. Next up, we have a card that has some fail safes that are clearly to stop it from being too good. That's why it's a custom card, not a classic card. But we have Grazolax, Illithids Scholar. For 1 blue, you get a 3/2 legendary horror. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. And whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. This card kind of screams ninja. Like if you're trying to do a bunch of ninjas in your cube, this card plays excellently with all of those cards, but it's not quite there, both on just blue's general classic powerful identity or really on rate. It's not the most efficient card, though what it does is very good. Kind of fragile, but I like everything that it does if it sticks around.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I actually think so ninjas is great. I think this is in if you don't have a higher powered cube, this is actually kind of a cool blink card. Because even though you have to recast the creatures, you either get to draw a card when they hit, or you can bounce them back to your hand to recast them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is another card I wish that the power and toughness were switched, because otherwise it is just like an enchantment. Because if you bounce it back to because you can bounce it back to your hand, but then you're not going to get the ability of drawing the cards when the rest of your creatures connect. So that's kind of a wash. Yeah, I think this is more of a cool card than a good card, mainly because of how the stats are worked out. But either way, if I was playing in a low-powered cube, I think this would be a fun one to try. Oh, what do we have next? I really am glad that how these have worked out. We are skipping, and I'm doing the very easy to pronounce cards, and Ryan's getting the very difficult to pronounce cards, which is only appropriate considering his dungeoning and dragoning background. Now, I'm really stalling for time because I cannot find the card that I'm supposed to talk about next.
So technically, the set should be previewed now, but it's a little scattered around the internet. But the card you're about, even though it is easy to pronounce, this is a big time D&D reference. I suppose I'll just take it for the interest of progressing the podcast, but it's Mind Flayer.
Okay.
For 3 blue, it's a 3/3 horror. And it has Dominate Monster. When a Mind Flayer enters the battlefield, you gain control of target creature for as long as you control Mind Flayer. So this Sower of Temptation, kind of persuasion, except it's a 3/3.
Okay. Still didn't come up. All right. It is not on Scryfall. Anyway, so it's a 3/3 for 5 with Sower of Temptation ability?
Yep. It doesn't have flying, but said it has that extra point of power and toughness, and I think that this is a good way to curb the power level of those kinds of cards. Like, control magic is not fun at all to play against, and
it's not.
Mind Flayer really isn't either, but at least you have a good shot at killing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I mean, I like Sower. I think Sower is a really great and appropriately power level card if you are into control magicking, which honestly, having blue steal your opponent's creatures has been a staple of cubes since they've existed. Bribery, I think, was the first like cube powerhouse card that I like conceptualized that had not really seen, in my experience, like play outside of that. And Cube was like the first time that other than I guess it was at the same time in Commander, but Bribery and Treachery and Control Magic, those have always been staples. And I think since Sower of Temptation has been printed, it kind of has too. And this is another good addition, similar in power level, a little more expensive, but it comes with a 3/3 body. So yeah, I'm for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Mind Flayer.
You open up some wacky stuff, being a creature with Reanimator strategies and Recurring Nightmare, as you well know.
I do well know it. A card that is not as good in as Mind Flayer with Recurring Nightmare is the next one, which since you took that one, since I could not find it, we'll switch off and I'll take this one, and it is Mordenkainen. There's actually spells in D&D that include Mordenkainen's name, a number of them. One of the most famous characters in the lore. Okay. Mordenkainen is a legendary planeswalker that bears its own name. 5 loyalty. You can cast for 4 blue. And it has 3 abilities plus 2. Draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. It's kind of similar to See Beyond, I believe, from Rise of the Eldrazi.
Yep.
-2, create a blue dog illusion creature token with this creature's power toughness are each equal to twice the number of cards in your hand. It's actually pretty solid. Could be a sizable creature.
Mm-hmm.
And then -10, exchange your hand and library, then shuffle. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. I mean, first of all, this card is going to be wildly popular.
Yes.
I'll go ahead and that's the layup. This has some pretty stiff competition in Cube.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is more what's holding it back. The power level is actually pretty high on this card. The token that it makes is not going to be small in most cases. At worst, you are making a 2/2 if you have a single card in your hand. But obviously, with the Planeswalker that you have, that is going to be significantly larger. And then, of course, if you can ever have any number of dogs, and then ultimate it, which is something that is often flavor text in Cube, especially for this card, you're going to have some hilariously large creatures.
Yeah. I imagine most of the time you're going to either already be winning, at which point whatever your 6-mana play is whatever, and it's pretty high loyalty and you draw some cards, or you're showing up in maybe some desperation, or maybe it does exactly equalize the battlefield. You make those dog illusions and try to claw back into the game that way. But I think that mostly this card's going to show up in Cube because people want to play with Mordenkainen, or they think this card is particularly cool. You know, this is why it's a custom card, not a classic card. Even though what it does is just kind of powerful, just isn't the best option for 6 mana.
Yep, that's basically how I feel. I'm sure this is going to make it into a lot of cubes. Yes. I have no doubt about that. And I don't even know anything about the flavor, but just reading the text of the card, I expect it to be popular from that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, our next card. I love this card. It is Secret Door. For 1 blue mana, you get an artifact creature wall. It's a 0/4 with Defender. And for 4 and a blue, you venture into the dungeon, activate only as a sorcery. Secret Door is a huge part of Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, that ventures into the dungeon. Everything about that is awesome. It's not going to show up in too many cubes. I have grown pretty attached to Wall Tribal in rarity restricted cubes. I really like Overgrown Battlement, Axebane Guardian, and then just having Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Omens, Wall of Roots. Vent Sentinel kind of sucks, but you can put it in, and then Doorkeeper is like a fine one.
Vent Sentinel doesn't suck. Vent Sentinel's red.
Yeah. If it was green,
which is kind of the same thing. Yeah. You don't want to have your one red wall.
Yeah.
With all your non-red walls.
Very awkward. But kind of like the wall tribal is very charming to me. Just mana sinks tend to be pretty good. Blocking is better than it is in higher power cubes, in rarity restricted cubes. And just venturing into the dungeon, there can be some pretty substantial payoffs for that. I guess, what's the technical rule with rarities in dungeons? I don't know. You can do that however you do that.
They're tokens according to the card.
All right. So yeah, that sounds like it's in bounds for Pauper Cube.
Sounds like it is. I don't have, I will note this is the only venturing into the dungeon card that if you have infinite mana, you can infinitely venture into the dungeon.
Ooh.
Just to note that. I think this is the only one. Otherwise, I'm not cold on this card. I don't know. It would have to be it would have to be a very specific cube, not even like a commons only, because this is different than the little Suntail Hawk we talked about last time, which I think has some pretty like a specific role that it's playing. Mm-hmm. And this is just a blocker that if you have 5 mana laying around, you can get a small effect. Yeah, 1 mana aggressive creature gets much more of a pass than 1 mana defensive creature. For sure. Yeah, I mean we're talking Suntail Hawk versus Kraken Hatchling here. Yeah, if you're trying to make games go long, you generally just want your cards to have bigger effects. It matters a little bit less that you curve out as long as you have successfully blunted your opponent's assault. Yep. Okay, so the next card, I think this is a super cool card. Talisman of the Trickster. This is an artifact equipment for a single blue. It has equip 2. And equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice Talisman of the Trickster. If you do, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So it gets +1/+1, and then anytime you hit, you can sacrifice it and then make another creature, regardless of what it is. There's no restrictions on size or color or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So basically, in most cases, you're going to be putting this on a creature with evasion or a creature that must be blocked. So if you ever connect with it, it is going to spell doom for your opponent. I don't think I would put this in most cubes that have, I don't want to say rares, but like rare power level. But it is very powerful in cubes of a common and uncommon power level. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's one of those kind of in that weird space where like clearly not good enough in cubes with rares and definitely good enough in cubes with not. All right, our next card, it's a little bit more specific. It is the Black Staff of Waterdeep. And I'm talking slowly because I'm stalling for time. Here it is. 1 blue mana legendary artifact. You may choose not to untap the Black Staff of Waterdeep during your untap step. It has Animate Walking Statue. 1 and a blue, tap it. Another target non-token artifact you control becomes a 4/4 artifact creature for as long as the Black Staff of Waterdeep remains tapped. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, there's a number of cards that do this or approximately this. Kind of, you see some 4/4s, some 5/5s. We're talking about your Ensoul artifacts. The original blue-black Tezzeret, Agent of Bolus, I believe was the card's name. Skilled Animator, and there's kind of diminishing returns on those kind of effects. They only go on very specific cubes. What I like about this one is it does battle back on those diminishing returns because it is just the artifact. So if you draw this and in a soul artifact, you just suit this one up and attack for 5. So if you're in the market for that kind of thing, this card fits into those environments very well. Yeah. I mean, I think if you are doing Insult, if you have Insult artifact in your cube, this is probably like a slam dunk because you're mitigating that the downside of losing the card advantage. Because by the nature of those cards, they're generally 2-for-1s, and as long as you can supply a steady stream of artifacts, this is going to supply a steady stream of 4/4s. Yeah, and I do think that this card is going to show up in a non-zero number of vintage cubes.
just because of the nature of a lot of the cards that are high picks in those environments. You have a lot of artifact mana. Being able to turn those into creatures matters. Is going to be another artifact for your Talarian Academy, all that stuff. It's a little bit weaker than a lot of the cards in that environment, but it does fit mechanically in a number of spots. And then, like you said, anywhere within Soul Artifact.
I also want to add that with the Modern Horizons 2 bridges, which are the indestructible 2-color lands, those are reasonable cube cards as opposed to basically all of the other artifact lands that have come before it. And I mean, putting it on an indestructible land, that is historically what Ensoul Artifact has done, working in conjunction with Darksteel Citadel. So you could replicate that with some ease in a cube format as well.
Yep.
Okay, next up we have True Polymorph. This is an instant 4 blue. Target artifact or creature becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature. This is an instant, so you can immediately do this either aggressively or defensively at any time. The mana cost is significant, but I can't imagine that they could make this cost less and have it not be busted.
Right.
So I guess this is what we're left with, is a 6 mana instant.
Yeah. Big effect. Like you said, you pay a lot for it. I'm sure this leads to a ton of hilarious moments in Commander Cube.
Yeah. All the 100% blowout 100% of the time. Yeah, definitely. If you're in a multiplayer queue where you're allowed to develop your board more, then this is a very cool card.
And I don't expect it to really show up anywhere besides that, but it could. It is still just a cool effect.
Yep, I agree.
All right, next we have a Wizards, a Spellbook, 5 blue artifact. Tap, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and then roll a d20, activate only as a sorcery. So when you roll that die on a 1 to 9, you copy that card. You may cast the copy, so you do have to spend the mana on it. On a 10 to 19, you copy that card. You may cast the copy by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. And on that natural 20, you copy each card exiled with Wizard's Spellbook. So it just keeps adding more spells to the spellbook as you go. So this copies each of them, and you may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana cost. So that can be a pretty mean 20. This cost is very steep. Very likely that this is going to show up in Commander cubes more than 1v1 cubes. But if you're trying to make your cube a lot about just instants and sorceries, this is a significant payoff for decks like that, especially if the power level is a little bit lower. This could be a nice card there. But but mostly it is just a bit inefficient, though the effect is quite powerful and cool.
Yeah, for me, in a Commander cube, I actually think this is a fantastic card because this is the type of card you pick early and you have a legitimate chance to build around and actually like make this a meaningful part of your deck. And you're not going to have the opportunity to do that in a 2-person environment, just because the mana cost is just way too much.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I was not a fan of the Magic Mirror. I'm not a fan of this for the same reasons. However, in a multiplayer cube where, the average CMC is significantly higher as far as meaningful spells go. I would easily first pick this card and try to build around it, no question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just in the 1v1 cubes, there just tends to be pretty easy access ways to destroy artifacts. And I think it's just so miserable, just the idea of this card being destroyed by a 2 or 3 mana card.
God, I know. Yeah, imagine if you spend your whole time like setting up Wizard Spellbook and they cast Ancient Grudge and then they don't even have to spend the whole card. Yeah.
Brutal.
Not good. Not where you want to be. Where you might want to be is with Wizard class. Maybe you want to be a wizard.
Strixhaven was 2 sets ago.
Well, this might be doing it better than Strixhaven. Wizard class is an enchantment class for a single blue mana, and level 1 is you have no maximum hand size. All right, so, not really anything notable here. Level 2 is when this class becomes level 2, draw 2 cards. Okay, so now we have spent 4 mana to do an inspiration. And by the way, this is an uncommon, I'd like to add. We've spent 4 mana to do an inspiration over 2 turns. Not bad. Not great because you have to do it at sorcery speed, but I've I don't think it's terrible. There's certainly been cards at this rate that have been played. And then level 3 is whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and that costs 4 and a blue. Now that is actually a pretty meaningful level 3. This provides card advantage. You get to do it over multiple turns, and then you start turning your creatures into threats. Presumably, if you are drawing cards, that is going to all roll up in a nice little package with this card. So I'm I think it's, I don't want to say fringe playable in common and common cubes, because I think there's some things that could push it out, because it at its base level, it's generally like a sorcery speed inspiration. But as a card I would want to draft and want to be good, even though I'm concerned that it won't be.
Yeah, I think the big point where this card can come up is if you are trying to diminish the power level of just easy to come by card advantage. And then you have this card which actually has kind of a cool effect for breaking board stalls if you love it all the way. When your cube doesn't have factor fiction, you're trying to get away from that, then this becomes a cool way to still let you draw some cards, but then it still keeps the gameplay about creatures on the battlefield.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Well said.
All right, our next card is Wanti Malison. I feel like at least one of those letters must be silent, but anyway. 1 and a blue, 2/1 Snake Rogue. Can't be blocked as long as it's attacking alone. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So this is a rogue, which I'm really bummed that this set did not feature party, or at least party creature types very prominently. But there are
Makes
some.
no sense.
Yeah, very, very bizarre decision to me. But this one is at least a rogue that lets you venture into the dungeon. It's not very powerful. I think you probably have to care about it being a rogue or have a cube that's very heavy on trying to venture into the dungeon to really want this card. When it comes to 2-mana unblockable stuff, this is really not one of the better options. But if you're specifically focused on some of the things it's about, then it does become an interesting one.
I think so. The thing about this card is I think this card might trick people. So I want to kind of lay out what I envision of how this will work. I believe that it is possible to create a deck in virtually any cube that this could go into, where you envision having this as your only creature. You're able to protect it or deal with your opponent's creatures and just continually to hit them for 2, venture into dungeon, accrue card advantage that way. I think that is possible. But what I think is more possible is you're going to spend a lot of drafts chasing that dream, and this is going to end up being a 2/1 for 2 that never hits or does anything meaningful, and is like one of the worst cards in your deck, because there's basically not really a middle ground in those two scenarios. And the first one is what you're going to be wanting for this card to perform at its best, and even then, you could have anything. Mm-hmm. You could have virtually any creature. You could have Looter Ilkor, and you're going to be doing the same thing.
If you're venturing into the dungeon alone, if this is the only card that's getting into the next step of the dungeon, then Looter Ilkor will generally be quite a lot better.
Exactly. So that's kind of what I want to, for people considering putting this in your cube. What Ryan said, you have to really be caring about venturing into the dungeon as a major theme into your cube, which I think that would be a cool cube. And then this card I would certainly put in, because I'm going to put every single meaningful creature that has ventured into the dungeon into it. But if I'm not having that cube, I'm going to stay away from this card because it is a trap. Mm. 2 more. First one, you come to a river, an instant for 1 and a blue, choose 1. When you come to the river, you can choose to fight the current. If you do, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, so a disperse, or you can choose to find a crossing. Target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn and cannot be blocked. I think disperse is like a super reasonable card if it's attached to virtually anything else. Mm-hmm. So I start with there. Whenever you're casting the second part, the find a crossing part, it is going to be very, very good, but it's going to come up very minimally. but just having that second thing on a modal spell, as we've said with these other cards, is always very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're kind of hoping that fighting the current has the same effect as finding a crossing. You're hoping that the disperse sets your opponent back and they can't block because you got rid of their creature. All the same, getting in that last chip shot sometimes as board stall, just making something unblockable. Maybe even the extra point matters. And I see this as another card that's going to play really well if you're trying to do ninjas. This card is great with Ninja the Deep Hours.
Yeah, very much so. Yep. So I definitely like this for rarity restricted cubes for sure.
Then our last blue custom card is You See a Guard Approach for 1 blue. It's an instant. You can choose one, distract the guard, tap target creature, or hide. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. So protection spells are nice to have around, in particular if you're trying to make a cube that's about creatures on the battlefield. You want some number of these effects, and then tapping a creature can also be significant in those combats. Probably a combination of rarity restrictions and trying to move gameplay in a certain direction, but both of these abilities can come up, and the fact that they're on the same card means you're more likely to be able to leverage that.
Yep, pretty easy. All right, I have one more. It's another thing that you do, and that is you find the villain's lair. An instant for 1 blue, choose one, foil their scheme, which is just counter target spell, so that is literally just cancel to start, or learn their secrets, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. While the draw 2, discard 2 is generally not great, the fact that this is a common means that if you are playing 3 mana counter spells in your commons only cube, I would imagine this is probably going to be one of the better ones.
Yeah, I totally just read the wrong card with You See a Guard Approach, as Justin knows, and I now explained to the listener, even though
I wasn't gonna tell
Justin
him.
covered for me, and I appreciate that. But yeah, this card is actually interesting. I don't think that You See a Guard Approach is as interesting for Pauper Cube as this one. But yeah, some cancels show up, and then sometimes you need something that's not a cancel, and so you're using 3 cards to draw 2 new cards.
Yeah, it's careful study.
But sometimes you got to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly, when the other half of the side is a counter spell and you're like, I've just, I'm holding up this counter spell, I've drawn lands, it's not meaningful, I'm just going to cycle these into something better. I mean, the flexibility on this card where the first effect is like a legitimate meaningful effect, which is a counter spell. I think pretty much anything you add onto this was going to make this playable.
Yes. Yeah, easily.
Yep. Okay. Are we done blue?
We are done with blue.
Okay. Well, you're getting a third color today because you've all been so good and listened up until this point, and we appreciate that. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, black cards for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
Hello there from Dominario's Judgment, a weekly podcast for Star City Games with me, Dom Harvey.
And me, Ari Lax.
Where we bring you the latest, greatest, and downright weirdest things Modern has to offer.
Want to know what to expect for next weekend's events? We've got you covered.
Do you want deep breakdowns of the hot topics and decks in Modern? We've got you covered.
Just want to make sure you don't miss the latest nonsense before your opponents teach you a lesson about it in the queues? Oh yeah, we have definitely got you covered.
And when Modern Horizons 2 blows the ceiling off this format, as it surely will, we'll be here with you to pick up the pieces.
Find us every week on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Or if you want to head over to StarCityGames.com, we'll be right there alongside all the great content from all your other favorite content producers.
All right, our last section for today, Black Cards and Adventure in the Forgotten Realms. There are definitely some good ones. I feel like, now I'm always biased, which you always call out, but look, I feel like these last few sets that we've been talking about with black cards have really been hitting it for Cube. Yeah. Am I wrong?
There's been some really nice black cards recently, and we'll get to it on a card by card basis, but there's a few standouts and cards that I really like the way that they're implemented in this set for black. We have more classic cards than we do for blue, which has also been kind of a trend as of late. Yeah. And we'll be starting with Ebon Death Draco Lich. This is 2 black for a 5/2 legendary zombie dragon with flash, flying, and it enters the battlefield tapped. You may cast Ebondeath Dracolich from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebondeath Dracolich died this turn. So, couple creature types that matters, zombie and dragon. Flash and entering tapped means that you can't run in with a surprise blocker, but you do get to leave your mana up on your opponent's turn. And this card, it's really easy to make this card castable from your graveyard. Unlike Demilich. The creatures die all the time in Cube. They can be your opponent's creatures. Use a kill spell in the late game. They can be your own creatures. If your zombie deck has some kind of sacrifice outlet, that's going to be pretty common for zombie decks. And this card really just plays into a bunch of different archetypes, and just the nature of generic blue-black control, it slots very well into that. And with 5 power as a flyer with some recursion, pretty easy to close the game with this. And it does have an advantage over a lot of win conditions for blue-black. The fact that you can cast it from the graveyard means if you're doing stuff like activating New Drill Core or Compulsive Research, just some draw spell that causes you to put your cards in the graveyard, you can pretty safely discard this in the early game if you just need to set up the rest of your hand some other way. And then it'll come back when it's time to close the game. Great at pressuring planeswalkers. I'm really excited about this card.
I believe the kids call this one a banger. And I would agree. I don't even care this has 2 toughness. It literally doesn't matter. This card's going to come back all the time. I imagine this card is probably frustrating to play against. At least it enters the battlefield tapped, which I'm actually thankful for, because I think that if this card didn't enter the battlefield tapped, it would be like vomit-inducing obnoxious.
Yeah.
But I would rather enter the battlefield tapped than not be able to block. The fact that this can block and you can just trade with anything. If a creature died this turn, that means that you can block and trade with something, and then at end of turn, just recast this from your graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if it goes into your graveyard or someone else's. Like Ryan said, creatures die all the time. And you could even trade up with basically anything with 5 power with this. This card is incredible. I mean, this is, I would say this is probably the card that's I would guess that's going to make it into the most cubes that we've talked about today of all of the cards. Yeah, I think that's probably the case.
I think that one of the white cards is more likely
Portable
to. I think it's very, Portable Hole and Monk of the Open Hand, I expect to just show up in a ton of cubes. But this one, both in terms of just classically powerful for Dimir control, but then a couple things that you can care about for custom cubes as well. This one's going to show up a ton.
Yeah, I mean, and we're not even... We could talk for longer about sacrifice strategies and how well this plays with those, but I mean it's more of the same. This card's great. If you have other creatures in your cube, you should probably put this one in.
Right.
Now, if you don't and you're like, this is going to be the only one, I'd be like, well, it's probably not good enough. But otherwise, this is going to make it.
Yeah, if you have no other creatures, then I guess there's no kill spell. So yeah, maybe even still.
Maybe, it's still a 5/2 with flash and flying. Yeah, maybe so. All right. The next one, Power Word Kill. Now, I have heard of this. This is a very famous D&D thing, right?
Yeah, big time.
Big time. All right. It does a good job. Power Word Kill, an instant for 1 and a black. Destroy target non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon. A lot of words on there, but those are collectively less common among all creatures. That being said, I will point out those are all creature types that are more likely to kill you if they appear than other creatures. So if you have this, if you have this and you encounter one of those, you're going to feel real bad.
You should definitely pay attention to I understand you don't want to have a bunch of Doom Blades that kill dragons if you're doing Dragon Tribal, but if you're going to put this card in your cube, make sure it kills stuff that people actually want to use a removal spell on.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, like this is another in the long line of restricted 2-mana black kill spells for instant speed. I don't know where I would rank it, and that's kind of that for me. This is it depends on the size of the cube card. That being said, if it is a larger cube, I'm sure this is going to have no trouble making it in. If it's a smaller cube, probably won't. It is clearly powerful. It is I mean, the thing is, I think it reads more interesting. I don't think it plays more interesting. I think it plays pretty much the same. But it will be more interesting when you really need to kill one of those, and then you can't, and then they kill you with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we're ever going to get 1 and a black just terminate for that
not.
Exact casting cost.
I actually hope we don't.
Yeah, it'd be less interesting. But when it comes to cubes, as we get more cards like this that kill a lot of things, you kind of have 1 and a black terminate for more cubes. And you can control it, so it's just like, okay, well, I particularly like this card, so I'm going to put in a kill spell that cannot interact with this, be it you make it so Go for the Throat can't destroy it, or Power Word Kill, or some other restricted kill spell can't kill it, but can destroy a lot of the other cards in the cube. You get to shift the importance and the efficacy of some cards if you pay a lot of attention to that, or just generally, this is an efficient removal spell that's going to make a lot of decks. Yeah.
This is going to be obvious, but this is like strictly more powerful in common uncommon cubes than it is in cubes with rarity restrictions, because there's just less of these creatures.
Yeah, it's a lot closer to terminate in rarity restricted environments.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, so this is an easy one that you have a lot of good options, and you're going to pick among the best of those, and this will be in that consideration.
All right, next we have white. 1 and a black, 3/2 zombie soldier. White enters the battlefield tapped. That's a life drain. Whenever a creature dealt damage by white this turn dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token and exile that card. Now, this is something that I like. There are just a lot of aggressive black cards for cubes that are just too hard to cast. We went at length about cards that cost black at 2 mana when we did Modern Horizons 2 set review. And this card is weaker than the card we were discussing there, but because it's easier to cast, I like it more. Now, we are talking about what I consider to be a classically powerful card, even though this effect is not particularly strong. I do think just 2 mana, 3 power creature that is splashable is a huge deal, because mono black is not where you want to be for an aggressive deck. If you are planting some roots for an aggressive black deck, you have to plan on that deck branching into white and or red as well. And splashability is just massively important. So it's the most important thing. Yeah,
it's the most important thing.
And being a zombie is a big deal. There's a lot of zombies that cost black. So I like it for custom cubes, but I do want to just make the note that I consider this card classically powerful, largely because of that splashability.
It doesn't make it into classic for me, but I do like the card. I feel like in past times, we would have traded this card's ability to come into battlefield tapped for some sort of mana requirement on that second ability. And I'm glad that we have landed on this from a design perspective. Obviously, it entering the battlefield tapped is not great, but you're planning on attacking with this, not blocking, so it's not really a huge deal. But the fact that you don't have to spend mana to do that second ability, I think is a really big deal. And if you can find a way to have this not die after it kills a single creature, you're going to be doing real great.
Yeah.
Because the intent is that this will die and that you will get a 2/2 zombie token out of that deal. And that's pretty good. It's a pretty solid card for the reasons that Ryan said. The reason that this isn't classic for me is because black aggro is not a classic archetype yet.
Yeah, but I was going to make that point too. I do largely agree with that. And we're approaching the tipping point. I don't know if we're there, but there's cards like Gravecrawler and Cryptbreaker that I think are excellent cards. They just require something a little bit more specific. And crossing the threshold to actually being able to consistently make these into 2 or more color decks is a big deal. And just having more cheap zombies with more power is a big deal. And just more splashable black aggressive cards is a big deal.
Yeah, I agree with that. And honestly, the zombie part is actually the most meaningful portion for me, because you really want effective attacking zombies, not just recursive zombies.
Mhm.
And so many of the like cubable zombies are focused on recursion, which is fine, but you need, like, they tend to focus on like doing Gravecrawler shenanigans and all this other recursion, and white is just a card that hits you for 3. We were talking earlier about a 3 power attacker on this rate being when you start to have like a meaningful threat, and this does fill that role. So I don't know, maybe it is closer to classic for me, but the only reason I'm hesitant to put it in there is because of the lack of black aggressive cards spread across the rest of cubes. I don't think that we're quite there yet. I really wish we were. I thought we were like really heading down that path when we hit Knight of the Ebon Legion a couple years ago, and it's like it's tapered off a little bit, and I feel like we get like 1 or 2 a year, and it needs to be slightly more frequent. The real problem is, sorry, I have one more thing to say. The real problem is that as black gets to the point, if you were to take the black aggressive cards that we have now and transport it to 5 years ago, black would be considered an aggressive color on par with white and red. But the fact that we've had white and red continue to advance past black means black is always catching up, and they're still not able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's fair. I'll make one last pitch for this card, and it was kind of a joke when I said it, but it's just kind of true. And I've continued to repeat it because I do just kind of believe it. But the classically powerful black decks in Cube, it's like Reanimator, second archetype. And I think that white is very much in contention with literally any of the second archetypes. Like black aggro with this card, I think it's right up there in that scrum. I wish that the deck was just good. I wish I could endorse it in that way. I agree. It's not quite there. I think that we need to see more cards of this nature, that splash ability to get there. And maybe I'm calling this someday classic, but I am hopeful and expectant to see this card in those ranks.
All right. Well, are you ready to talk about a card that's going to disappoint you right on the heels of this card?
Love to be disappointed.
Okay, great. Well, how about Forsworn Paladin, which is a 1/1 for a single black, the human knight with menace. Fortunately, it has abilities. 1 and a black, tap it, pay 1 life, create a treasure token. And 3 and a black, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. If mana from a treasure was spent to activate this ability, that creature also gains Death Touch until end of turn. Why is this so different in power level from Knight of the Ebon Legion when it looks kind of similar?
Yeah, I've read this one a few times. Menace on a 1-drop is nice to have. These other abilities, man, they're clunky.
Yep, super clunky.
And like we talked about Prismari Command and actually revisited it after playing, and I think that we both accept now that just like making treasure token for value is just powerful.
It was much better than we expected.
Yeah, just getting a random treasure token is pretty good, but paying 2 and tapping your 1-drop for a treasure is not something that really any deck that is coherent and good wants to do.
It is I guess I don't have anything else to do, so I'll do this ability.
Right.
It's not an ability you want to have on a creature that you're interested in playing. It's an ability that shows up on something that you were already playing, and it happens to be the only thing you can do at the time. Not the best thing you can do, the only thing you can do.
And I like the mechanic that there's a few cards that employ this in the set where an ability or a card is modified if you use mana from a treasure. This one is weird, and also pumping power and adding Death Touch is redundant. It's like, yeah, give Grave Titan Death Touch. That'll matter. We see it now and again. And it's like, why? Like, I get it. It reads more powerful maybe to some people than it is, and it's kind of free to tack it on there. But on this card, it's kind of a mess.
I get why it's on. I get why it's on here.
I guess you have to double block this creature is the idea.
Oh, no, I was thinking because on turn 5, when your opponent's attacking with a 4 toughness creature and you've spent a turn making a treasure because it was the only thing you could do, you're like, thank God this has Death Touch so it can at least trade up with something after I've spent 6 mana to do it.
Yeah.
Why just make this a 2/1 and I'm just all aboard.
Yeah, the abilities on this card are frustrating and somewhat maddening, but it is a 1/1 human knight for 1 mana, so it's going to show up somewhere.
Yeah, eventually I'm sure that.
Yeah, maybe you just ignore the rest of the text for your own sanity, but
this is what I'm talking about, man. They're just like, whoa, you get 1, you can't have 2. How dare you have 2 good black aggressive cards, just 1. Anyway, what's next?
We have Gelatinous Cube, another classic D&D. Custom magic card, though. 2 black, 4/3 ooze, engulf. When Gelatinous Cube enters the battlefield, exile target non-ooze creature an opponent controls until Gelatinous Cube leaves the battlefield. Dissolve. Exit in black. Put target creature card with mana value X exiled with Gelatinous Cube into its owner's graveyard. So a strictly different, generally worse Ravenous Chupacabra. I like the flavor of this card. It's just really not quite there on power level.
When I first made my cube back in 2009, I had the card Faceless Butcher in my cube, and it was hanging on for playability 12 years ago. And time has not been kind to Faceless Butcher.
No.
And the 2 power is not enough. I like the theme of this card. It's cool. I probably won't be playing it. But in a lower powered environment, like where it's not rarity restricted. Because I think that this card is still not even... Like, even if it was like if I was trying to do a powerful common uncommon cube, this wouldn't make it in. But if you're doing a cube that's not rarity restricted, that is lower power level, that maybe you want a higher level of interaction, continual interaction. I don't know. Maybe this is where you would slot that.
Yeah,
it does have cube in it, so I think it gets some bonus points. But
that is true. It can go in the cube.
Yeah, go in the cube.
Yeah, I think that the motivations for this card are more aesthetic than power level. Like, if you really like this set and you are interested in Dungeons and Dragons at least as much or more than you're interested in Magic the Gathering, then a cube that just highlights what you like about both, this card's going to fit there. It's probably going to show up and be like fine in Arena Cube, but in general, it's just not quite there.
I don't even think it will.
Okay, so
I think it'll show up. I don't think it'll be fine.
It basically every time, but like you gotta make a lot of your statements around Magic Arena conditional, because like somebody's gonna win every game they play with this card in their Arena Cube. There's just enough games happening where that is true and inevitable.
It is not as good as Felidar Retreat, and if someone could just crush a draft with Felidar Retreat, which actually, first of all, I actually like Felidar Retreat. Ryan doesn't like it, but that's neither here nor there. Gelatinous Cube, I'm sure, will appear. I don't think it will be good, but it will be played. So, something to be said for that. Or there's not. Or you can just take nothing away from that statement. Anyway, next card, Grim Wanderer. This is a Goblin Wizard.
Warlock.
No, excuse me, a Goblin Warlock. And the art looks real sinister. It is a 5/3 for 1 and a black. So a 5/3 for 2. Goblin Warlock with Flash. However, you can only cast it because of its tragic backstory if a creature died this turn.
I wanted to make sure to put this card on the list because I think some people think this card's really good, but it's actually really bad. That the drawback of a creature needing to die this turn is actually quite significant, and your aggressive deck doesn't want to play creatures that have some kind of casting contingency. Your sacrifice deck doesn't want to play cards that can only be cast once your engine is running. Once your engine is running, you want cards that amplify the power of your engine. You're looking for redundant Blard Artists and token makers, not like finally I can play the 5/3 and sacrifice it to my other creature. And your control deck just doesn't want to touch this at all. So this card's very cool. It's just not particularly good.
Yeah.
And it's actually a category of card I like a lot. I love that they print cards that look better than they are, because there are people who are excited about this card. And if I'm the person that stepped on your dreams, I'm sorry. It was going to be me or somebody else, though.
Yes. It will, as it turns out, would have been me as the other person. Had I rolled this one in the we alternate on saying cards. So yeah, I that's what I was going to say. A lot of what you were going to say. When I'm playing the sacrifice deck, I don't want a 5/3 for 2. I want 2 1/1s for 2. I don't care. Or 2 0/1s, whatever.
Yeah.
Just give me 2 things. I don't need the 5/3. That's not what the deck's trying to do.
Any warm body, any cold body, not this one.
Yeah. I just want them. I just want multiple of them. I don't care how big they are. This is a cool looking card. The text box, the flavor, the art. I imagine people really like this card. I think it's going to be added to people's cubes. It'll be passed around in packs. It won't be drafted. And then the owner's going to be like, has anyone played Grim Wanderer? I really want that card to work. And then no one will cast Grim Wanderer.
I first picked Grim Wanderer, but the deck just didn't come together.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. Tragic backstory, I think, is appropriate flavor to have on this card. It is more meta than it realizes.
All right, next we have a Lolth Spider Queen. 3 black for a 4 loyalty, a Planeswalker, a Lolth. Is a static ability. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth Spider Queen. As a 0 ability, you draw a card and lose 1 life. You can -3 it to create 2 2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. A little funky with the static ability, because if those spiders die while you still control Lolth, you do get 2 of those loyalty back. But anyway, and it has a -8. You get an emblem with whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by 1 or more creatures you control, if that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. So that's kind of a weird ability, kind of a lot of words to get there. If you're interested in a lower power Planeswalker, a 5 mana Phyrexian Arena that you can do other things with is kind of nice, good to have in that environment. And then this is another card that I think is going to have more aesthetic motivations, a D&D reference here, than necessarily being there on power level or really even theme. Like thematically, this card is fine in a sacrifice deck, but it's not a particularly high pick.
Yeah, so I'm a little warmer on this card. I think in like medium power level cubes that aren't rarity restricted, where you're trying to do a sacrifice theme, this is actually a pretty cool card. There's not a lot of Planeswalkers in black, strangely, that like really support, I'm going to put a bunch of tokens into play. Those generally come from other colors, from like white and red, that put more tokens into play. And this is one that puts multiple, I think this is the only black Planeswalker that puts multiple tokens into play in a single activation.
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I would believe that.
Yeah, so because of that, I actually think this has some merit in those cubes. Like if this cost less to have the same effect, like if they made it so it just, cost 4 mana basically for the exact same card, I would actually be pretty warm on this card, because having a 2/1 creatures and then having the Planeswalker stick around is actually pretty sweet for 4 mana. But 5 is a lot, which is why it doesn't. I think it's gonna miss on a number of cubes. But I actually do think that this makes it into a bunch of people's cubes that is not going for the most powerful thing and is really going for theme, for like a sacrifice deck, or just wanting to have like basically a value based black section, because I think this card worked really well there. So I do like it. I wish I don't think you'll ever do the -8. I guess you will if you want to do it to say you've done it. But just the constant machine of -3, -3, -3, and continue to make those, I think is a pretty realistic thing that can happen once you get this card down.
Sure, makes sense.
Yep. So the next one, Ray of Enfeeblement. This is an instant for a single black. Target creature gets -4/-1 until end of turn. If that creature is white, it gets -4/-4 until end of turn instead. Now, this is, I think, the only hate card that we have on this list.
Yeah, so this is a full cycle. This is the one that I think is just pretty generically playable. There's a few other, like the white one phases something or it exiles it if it's black. The blue one it stops something from untapping, but it taps it and makes it lose its abilities if it's red. As a combat trick, this is excellent against a creature of any color. I don't love hate cards. You know, this is just a 1-mana kill spell against white creatures of many sizes, most sizes, really. But the fact that it's such a significant combat trick otherwise, kills a Llanowar Elf on turn 1, which is a pretty big deal in any cube that has a Llanowar Elf or a Savannah Lions. I suppose it would kill the 2 or 3 drop there. But anyway, this card's just solid. It's not quite there in terms of being classically powerful, but I wouldn't be totally surprised or bothered if this showed up in even a higher power level cube if it had an aggressive deck with 1 toughness creatures.
I'm so on this card. I'm a big fan of the card Disfigure in general, probably more than most people, which you would think would mean that I would be more interested in this card. It is a very nice combat trick, in addition to picking off the small creatures. But -1 is such a minimal thing. Like I don't think that there's anything I would actively play that just dealt 1 damage, unless it's like a planeswalker that does it and has other things attached to it.
And we do get a lot more 2 toughness creatures these days.
Yeah. To more to Ryan's point, and as I've said on this show before, cube is often a place where you have a disproportionate amount of power to toughness across the board for all creatures. So this card I'm probably not giving it enough credit. I certainly did not do the math for this card. I did not go through a cube and see how many cards that this would kill. And I also, I think the thing that turns me off is I don't like specific color hate cards in cubes. I always cringe whenever I see Celestial Purge in someone's cube. Not because it's not good, but because it is, and that's more problematic than anything.
Yeah, I think that the reason that I wanted to have this on the custom list is, again, more of an aesthetic thing than anything.
Okay.
I think this is just that another one of those cards that makes a lot of sense if you're trying to be evocative of Dungeons and Dragons and reference that sort of thing. I'm totally there on it being a hate card. And it would be something that depends on the specific cube list if -4, -1 is something you're really in the market for. But again, that's just another qualifier for the custom slot anyway.
Okay, fair enough. The next one, I imagine this is the card we're going to disagree on. And this is Sepulture Ghoul. Is a 2/1 zombie for 1 and a black. Sacrifice another creature. Sepulture Ghoul gets +2/+2 until end of turn. However, there's another phrase on there that I don't like. Activate this ability only once each turn. Get out of here. How I thought we were just going to get an Nantuko Husk for 2. That would have been a cubable card.
So I agree that this card is just not there. I don't think it's a consideration for classically powerful. And for most people, this is not going to get there for even your custom power level. You have to be trying to drive a very specific experience. Something that
frustration.
Something I've been very frustrated with cultivating or curating just zombie tribal is so many zombies just have those horrible pip intensive casting costs. And then they have drawbacks on top of that, but just the heavy pips are the real problem. Did you ever see kind of meta conversation about the card Walking Corpse in Innistrad?
No, I don't think so.
So
this is just 2/2 for 1 and a black zombie.
2 mana 2/2 zombie. It apparently got into the file just as an error, or somebody put it through and it wasn't a blue. I think Rosewater tried to push back on it. I'd have to like Google the exact conversation and who said what, but it was a big deal that it was a 2 mana 2/2 zombie that could block, and it was just like 1 and a black, and somebody had to fight to make Walking Corpse exist as a black grizzly bears that was a zombie. And that
was an
history,
exhausting thing to hear.
Oh yeah, with that history, I am grateful for this card, and this card does actually end up clearing the hurdle for zombie trial for my spooky cube, just because so many zombies are so hard to cast, and I wish it could sacrifice additional creatures. That'd be awesome. Maybe someday. But just knowing how far up the hill we already are makes me appreciative of this card.
That was a nice story, Ryan. It did not sell me on the card at all.
Oh, again, I think I'm the only person who likes and will ever like this card. But Sepulchre Ghoul, I'm here for you.
Yeah, I'm not, unfortunately. I wish that I were. I really want to be. I'd be all over this if it didn't have that clause on it, but it's just letting me down. That's letting me down. How about a card, a zombie that I like more than Sepulchre Ghoul?
Let's go. To Shambling Ghast. 1 black for a 1/1 zombie. When Shambling Ghast dies, choose 1. Brave the Stench. Target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 till end of turn. Or search the body, create a treasure token. So this is kind of the new Festering Goblin, but you can choose to just make a treasure. And we talked a little bit earlier about how incidental treasure tokens can be kind of subtly powerful thing to do. So that upgrade there, it's a 1-drop. I've been singing the praises of 1-drops on and off on the podcast. So I do like this one quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I'm actually a really big fan of this. A Festering Goblin and their friends always like play much better than they look. The fact that they can regularly 2-for-1 on a 1-mana card, or otherwise make combat math very difficult, adds a lot to their playability. And this now just has an additional effect on top of it. I think in lower rarity cubes, especially all common cube, this is a slam dunk there. And even if you are doing a theme that cares about creatures dying in any sort of way in a common uncommon cube, then I'd snap add that there too.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan as well.
Yep. Okay, here's a very interesting one. The Sphere of Annihilation. This is an artifact for X and a black. Sphere of Annihilation enters the battlefield with X void counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile Sphere of Annihilation, all creatures and planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it, and exile all creatures and planeswalkers in all graveyards with mana value equal less than the number of void counters on it. So this is a gigantic sweeper that you can choose to scale that is basically has suspend 1, is how I'm kind of looking at this one. I think that cards that have a delayed sweeper effect are much better than they look pretty much all the time. Because against aggressive decks, if you are the mid-range or the control deck, playing this out stops further aggression usually from being pushed, and you get to untap on your next turn basically with a clear board. And I think that actually has a lot more merit than people generally give it credit for. That's not even mentioning the fact that you can just make sure you play a larger creature and then set it to not get your creature and get everything smaller than that.
Yeah, that is true. The conditionality there, you can definitely play that to your advantage. I am colder on delayed sweepers. the taking the hit for another turn can be a big deal, but the lower the power level of the cube, the less of a deal that is. And also, this being an artifact is significant. That this could be another funky card for your Trinket Mage package, which could be pretty rad.
Oh yeah, that's a good point too. And I'm not like there's not a world where I believe this is better than even like a 5 mana, like a Slash the Ranks or something like that. But I do think for like medium power level cubes, this is like just a more interesting type sweeper.
Yeah, I'm generally cold on having many or particularly good sweepers in cube, because I think that they combat cool decks more than they facilitate cool decks. Like the decks that are good that play sweepers tend to be less interesting to me by a wide margin than the decks that are bad against sweepers.
Yeah.
So a little bit of power
fair.
Restriction there is something that I'm in favor of.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. All right. I think this is our last one for today.
Indeed. We have the Vorpal Sword. For 1 black mana, you get an equipment. The equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Death Touch. It equips for black, and it has an activated ability for 5 black. Until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever an equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So I hate that the equip cost is double black. However, that ability is the kind of thing where people are going to see that card in a pack, and a lot of people want to chase that dream. I think that just a ton of Magic players wants to get the activation in and get the lethal Vorpal Sword going. Now, this generally goes into decks where you'll be crossing the finish line much sooner with that +2/+0. It doesn't matter because
that's not why you're playing this card.
Logic doesn't play into excitement.
Yeah. I mean, I understand this card in its full context. You will know upon reading this card for the first time whether you are in or you are out.
Yep.
I think it's as simple as that. If you're in, man, it's going to make some great stories when it eventually happens. It's going to not happen for a while, but at least the equipment's not embarrassing. It does have the black to equip it. Maybe, apparently we have found out which the two of us likes pips more, but we'll let the listeners decide that. Either way, the effect is pretty reasonable, like, without the 8 mana effect. At some point, the card is decent enough where that will happen at some point. And it's going to be a great moment when it does. So
yeah,
it won't be in my queue, but I hope I'm there when it happens.
Yeah, it also won't be in my queue, but I am the kind of person where if you send a pack my way with this card, there's a good chance that it ends up in my deck.
You might fancy yourself a Vorpal Sword, see what happens.
Yeah,
I can get that. All right, any other black cards that we might have missed?
I mean, we can touch on Warlock class real quick. I think the card is one of the weaker classes, but it replaces itself.
Yeah,
which makes it interesting. So it's a 1 black mana class enchantment. On level 1, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature dies this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. And level 2 for 1 and a black. When it becomes level 2, you look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. So it's even on cards there, but so far the abilities are pretty weak. You go to level 3 for 6 and a black. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So you're paying a lot for what you get, but it replaces itself. And the classes are just a pretty cool card type. So I'm sure some people are pretty excited to play with this one.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm kind of about like making a slower cube where these are good. Like, I think that they're all cool enough to where if you wanted to make your cube about these things, I think that would be a cool cube. I think it would take some work to kind of calibrate the power level to be appropriate. But I also think it would be a worthwhile payoff because the cards are so cool. And I think that there are very attractive draft options to try to do this thing and try to embody what this class is trying to do. So I am about that specifically. Not this card on its own, but I think if you could make that cube where this is good, which I do think is possible, then I'm more interested.
Yeah, I'm totally into that.
Awesome. Okay. With that, we are done for the day. Looks like if we double this, we're not going to make it in under 5 hours. Lucky or unlucky for you. I don't know which side of you. Probably lucky for you if you've listened to this entire thing 2.5 hours in. So remember, subscribe to the 540 on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, your local podcast app, anywhere you listen to podcasts, really. If you want, because you're so nice, you can leave us a review in any place you're able. The algorithm loves that. Just for any sort of interaction, you can click your 5-star rating. You can say, this is my favorite podcast in the entire world. You can say, this is the okayest podcast in the entire world. That's all great. Anything the algorithm can eat, it will enjoy, and it will also appreciate. We will appreciate it, and will help get the word out from a digital perspective about the 540. You can find me on Twitter at jparnell1. My other podcast, Think Twice MTG, which is magic and pop culture. And of course, on Commander Versus every week. We've taken a quick break because one of our co-hosts, Jeremy Knoll, had a young baby. I guess all babies are young, but this one was extra young. Yeah. Actually, it was like 2 weeks late.
Yeah, quite the ordeal with the baby Knoll watch.
It was. Yeah, Jeremy told me 3 times, we're going to the hospital and we're not going to come back unless we have a baby. And he lied 2 of the times. Now he had nothing to do with the lie. It was not up to him in the slightest remote bit. But anyway. So anyway, Commander Versus is where you can find me. Ryan, where can people find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, and you can find my articles weekly on StarCityGames.com. This week's article was my top 10 cube cards from Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So, you might get a little bit ahead on your podcast listening for next week. But if you stuck around for this whole episode, I assume you'll be around for that anyway. But you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, articles weekly on StarCityGames.com.
Wonderful. Thank you all for listening. We're going to be back next week with our part 2 in Adventures into the Forgotten Realms. And then we'll be back 2 weeks after that to cover both of the Innistrad sets. No, I'm just kidding. That's in a couple of yeah, but we will be back next week to talk red, green, and everything else that's left. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.